Chapter 1826. Yi Qianshan was startled. She stepped back, but he had already wrapped his arms around her and started kissing her. Yi Qianshan struggled a little. Shenjulia held her firmly in his arms and slammed her onto the bed in an instant. You. Yi Qianshan had just gotten a chance to speak, but before she could say a word, her mouth was sealed again. Shenjulia's upper body was bare. He spread his legs apart and pressed her beneath him. Hot kisses flowed along her neck. Yi Qianshan looked up and gasped uncontrollably. She put her hand on his back and patted him gently. You. Mom and Dad are outside. That's not good. Shenjulia pressed his lips against her chin. He gently sucked on it and mumbled, they won't come in. Yi Qianshan rubbed his hair. Her breathing was a little uneven. She said, go take a shower. I don't despise you. As Shenjulia spoke, he had already unbuttoned her bra through her skirt. It doesn't matter how long you haven't washed it. I despise you. It's too late to despise me. You can't get rid of me. Shenjulia's voice was low and husky. He leaned into her ear and his warm breath was on her neck. Yi Qianshan was so sensitive that her whole body trembled. But she felt like flying. Shenjulia couldn't wait to press her against him. His slightly rough hands stroked the insides of her clothes. Yi Qianshan felt his presence. Her cheeks turned red and her heart raced. They were still in his house. If his family found out, would they think that she was very lewd? Shenjulia didn't seem to be aware of it. He unzipped the back of her dress and slowly removed it from her shoulders. Her snow-white skin was exposed and it made one's blood boil. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Shenjulia paused. Yi Qianshan's body stiffened. They looked at the door at the same time. Yi Qianshan was so nervous that her heart was about to jump out. Yi Qianshan pushed him away, got up and straightened her clothes. Shenjulia shouted with displeasure, who is it? Your grandmother. He roared. Yi Qianshan almost laughed out loud. Why does it sound like he's scolding me? When Shenjulia saw the expression on Yi Qianshan's face, he kissed her on the lips in displeasure. He slowly straightened his pants and walked toward the door. Yi Qianshan hid herself and fastened her skirt. Shenjulia had already opened the door. Old Mrs. Shun was standing in the doorway with a dark expression on her face. Shenjulia made up his mind and looked at the old lady. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, Grandma, what's wrong? What about the girl? He's inside. What's wrong? Shenjulia had a bad feeling about this. Yi Qianshan did the same. She strode forward. When old Mrs. Shun saw Yi Qianshan, she immediately went forward to hold her hand. Yi Qianshan was shocked by the suddenness of the situation. She exclaimed, Grandma, what's wrong? Shenjulia quickly pulled Yi Qianshan back and asked, Grandma, what are you doing? Let me see your hand again. Yi Qianshan's heart was filled with apprehension. She extended her palm. Male left, female right. Show me your right hand. Yi Qianshan's heart beat faster. She extended her right hand. Shenjulia frowned. He pulled Yi Qianshan's hand back unhappily and said, Grandma, how many times have I told you not to believe in such superstitious things? What have you heard this time? Chapter 1827. Old Mrs. Shun took Yi Qianshan's hand and looked at it. She frowned and said, I was right. This girl can't do it. Yi Qianshan's heart skipped a beat. She was embarrassed. Shenjulia's expression darkened as he said, Grandma, I'm the one getting married, not you. Previously when you liked Lily, I listened to you and pursued her. But now I like Qianshan. Can you support me? Yi Qianshan's expression darkened. No, this girl will die young. You can't marry her. You'll die young too. Old Mrs. Shun stomped her feet in anger. Would I harm you? I'm doing this for your own good. Julia, don't make me angry. If I say no, it means no. Grandma, you don't have the final say in this world. But I have the final say in this family. Old Mrs. Shun yelled. You can't be with her. Yi Qianshan's heart trembled. She forcefully pulled her hand back. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't even force a smile. She took a step back and said, Old Shun, don't argue with the old lady. I'll leave. Shenjulia's expression darkened. He pulled Yi Qianshan over and yelled, No. Yi Qianshan was shocked. Her heart was pounding. Shen Longyue, his wife, and Nanny He were all watching. Yi Qianshan's eyes were burning. She struggled and said, No. Shenjulia's voice was softer than before, but it was still firm. Grandma, you should stop doing such superstitious things. Do you know how many people you've harmed because of your superstition? I've harmed people? Old Mrs. Shen's eyes widened in disbelief. When have I harmed anyone? Shinjilia, are you still my grandson? It's precisely because I'm your grandson that I'm reminding you. Think about Sister Manting, my brother, and Yi Yu. Which one of them didn't suffer because of you? Think about it. If you hadn't been so alarmist, would my brother and Yi Yu have gotten a divorce? If you hadn't been superstitious and believed that Sister Manting would bring good luck to our family, would Sister Manting have become what she is now? Think about it. Which of these superstitious things you've said are true? Old Mrs. Shen couldn't believe it. Are you doubting me? Yes, Grandma, I really don't believe in these things. This is the era of science. I can explain to you what you're thinking with medical science. Old Mrs. Shen stomped her foot in anger. You little rascal. I didn't make you a doctor to deal with your grandmother. No matter what, I'm a doctor now and I believe in science. Chan is my woman and I will be responsible for her. Today, I brought her home just to tell you that I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a wife. This is just a notice, not an application. Whether you agree or not, I'm going to marry this woman. Shinjilia's tone was very firm. He stared at his grandmother without the slightest hint of wavering. Yi Qianshan hadn't expected Shinjilia, who usually seemed so frivolous, to say something like that at a critical moment. Chapter 1828. I'm doing this for your own good. Why do you have to be so stubborn? Old Mrs. Shen gritted her teeth. I've already told you that this girl has a short life. I'll go to an old friend. She won't live past 28. That's impossible. Shinjilia's face darkened. Grandma, you have to be so alarmist. Be careful that I don't fall out with you. Old Mrs. Shen looked at Shinjilia and trembled with anger. She shouted, You? How can you treat your grandma like this? I'm telling the truth, Grandma. You have to accept reality. Besides, it's impossible for me and Chanshan to separate now. Shinjilia held Yi Chanshan in his arms and looked around. He enunciated each word clearly. Chanshan is pregnant. I can't wait any longer. I want to get married as soon as possible. Yi Chanshan was instantly stunned. She turned to look at Shinjilia and reached out to touch her belly. Pregnant? When did she get pregnant? Why didn't she know? Shinjilia seemed to feel her gaze. He lowered his head and looked at her gently. He said, I'm sorry. I couldn't help it, but I really had no choice. Grandma is very stubborn. If I don't tell her the truth, I'm afraid she'll force us to break up. Yi Chanshan blinked. She didn't react. Everyone looked at them in disbelief. At the same time, their eyes shifted to Yi Chanshan's belly. Yi Chanshan felt goosebumps all over her body. She laughed dryly and said, Why, can't you stand it? Now, if people know that I'm pregnant before marriage, it won't be good. It's okay. I have to marry you before your belly grows up. Shinjilia looked at Yi Chanshan gently and said softly, I can't let you and the child down. Yi Chanshan couldn't stand it anymore. Under everyone's gaze, her face became redder and redder. She lowered her head and tugged at Shinjilia's clothes without saying another word. Mrs. Shen was also in disbelief. She said, Oh my God, Jilia, I thought you knew what to do. Why did you wait until now to bring it back for us to see? Shen Longyue was also dissatisfied. He frowned and said, You only brought it back now? Those who don't know better will think that the Shen family is a gangster family. Old Mrs. Shen stomped her foot, pointed at Yi Chanshan and said, This girl's palmistry and physiognomy show that she can't have children. How can she be pregnant? Jilia, don't lie to me. Yi Chanshan's heart skipped a beat. Her hair stood on end and she felt guilty. She wasn't pregnant. She couldn't be clearer about it, but this old lady could tell at a glance and even concluded that she couldn't have children. Could it be? Was it really possible that she wouldn't live past 28? Pooh. Impossible. Impossible. She was in good health, how could she not live past the age of 28? But if it was true she was 26 years old this year, and there were only 2 years left before she turned 28, then Shinjilia's eyes turned cold. He held Yi Chanshan in his arms and said coldly, Nanny, you've made a mistake. Old Mrs. Shen was infuriated and bellowed, Shinjilia. Shinjilia held Yi Chanshan in his arms as he stepped back and said, We're going to bed. The fetus needs to rest. Good night, Mom, Dad. Old Mrs. Shen was even angrier. Shinjilia had actually said good night to his parents but not to her. She was obviously telling the truth. It was impossible that she was pregnant. This girl couldn't get pregnant. She knew Shinjilia's temperament all too well. If he really married the girl when the time came, he would probably be alone for the rest of his life. Chapter 1829. However, Shinjilia was a stubborn man. How was she going to convince him? Old Mrs. Shen was so worried that her freshly dyed black hair was about to turn white. She stared at her grandson's room door and stomped her feet in anger. When Shen Longyue saw old Mrs. Shen's reaction, he stepped forward and said, "Mom, the children and grandchildren have their own happiness. As elders we shouldn't interfere too much. I'm doing this for his own good. When have I ever harmed my own family?" Old Mrs. Shen yelled anxiously. Shen Longyue didn't say anything. He pulled her and said, all right, let's go to sleep. The children are going to sleep too. But, go. Old Mrs. Shen was at a loss for words. She turned her head back to look at Shenjulia's room 3 times with every step she took. In the end she walked back into the room. Shen Longyue walked back to the sofa. Mrs. Shen and Nanny He were already sitting on the sofa. Seeing Shen Long come over, Madame Shen said, "I don't think this child will be short-lived. Although I don't understand these things, this girl looks like she has good fortune. Her life isn't short either. How could she be short-lived?" Hearing that, Nanny He chimed in and said, "I think so too. This girl is very sensible. Besides, didn't old Madam say that she can't have children? Isn't she pregnant now?" Shen Longyue took a sip of tea and snorted. "Do you really think it's true? I'm afraid it's just something that Jilia made up." In fact, Mrs. Shen was also suspicious. Hearing her husband's words, she was even more certain. She asked, "Why didn't you say anything just now? The son will make his own decisions. As his elders we just need to support him." Shen Longyue put down the teacup. "It's rare for our son to like this girl so much. I also think that she's not bad. If we listen to our mother, I'm afraid it won't be appropriate." "That's right. Didn't you say that young miss would be blessed? In the end, young master." Nanny He immediately realized that something was amiss and stopped. But after thinking about it, she continued, "Now she's living alone outside with a pregnant belly. It's not easy. Is this considered blessed? Young miss has suffered all her life and thought that she would be able to enjoy a good life once she came to our home. In the end, isn't this the end?" Shen Longyue lit a cigar and frowned, but he didn't say anything. Mrs. Shen sighed and said, "Perhaps Manting's good fortune hasn't arrived yet. She's already 30 years old. Half of her life has passed. If she doesn't enjoy life now, her whole life will have passed." Nanny He spoke bluntly. The scene was silent. After Shenjulia pulled Yi Chanshan into the room, he locked the door. Because of the drama, the atmosphere in the room was completely gone, and the mood was gone. Yi Chanshan clutched her stomach and asked, "When did I get pregnant?" "You'll be pregnant from now on." Shenjulia sat on the bed and said, "If you don't have one now, let's make one. As long as you're still willing to marry me, let's hurry up and get our marriage certificate tomorrow." "Tomorrow is Sunday. Then I'll go again on Monday. I'm going back to Kingstown. I've already bought the plane tickets." "Yes, let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and take a day off." Shenjulia stood up and wrapped his arms around her waist. He gently kissed her on the lips. "I'm sorry for making you feel aggrieved just now. I didn't know that Grandma would suddenly say something like that." Yi Chanshan smiled bitterly. "I was still mentally prepared. Yu was tortured so badly by your grandmother, so there's no reason that everything would be smooth sailing for me. Now that I've finally confirmed it, it's not going to be smooth sailing." Chapter 1830. When Shenjulia heard that, he poked her on the head and rebuked, "It's not up to Grandma to decide whether things will go smoothly or not. If you want to marry me, we'll be together. What if Grandma doesn't agree? It doesn't matter. She'll agree." Yi Chanshan felt that something was wrong. She frowned and thought for a moment before saying, "I think what Grandma said might be true. Didn't she say before that Yu was fated to get married again? Now that Yu has gotten married again, what if Yi Chanshan really died and didn't live past the age of 28? Impossible. Grandma is just spouting nonsense. Grandma claims to be a demigod, so half of what she says is true, and the other half isn't. Based on what Yu said earlier, I'm guessing that Grandma has the intention of urging them to divorce. She's just trying to prove that what she said is true." Yi Chanshan was stunned. Shenjulia continued, "Grandma has rarely been questioned in her life, especially when she has set her mind on something. She won't change her mind easily. Grandma is a little paranoid." "Is that an illness?" "Yes, it's a psychological illness. It's not serious, but it's difficult to treat. Moreover, Grandma is very uncooperative." Shenjulia gently stroked Yi Chanshan's head and softly said, "Grandma is used to being domineering, but I won't let Grandma affect us." "Okay." Yi Chanshan still felt that it was inappropriate. She looked around the room and said, "Why don't I go back first? I don't think it's appropriate. I've never had a boyfriend and I've never met my boyfriend's parents. But is it appropriate for us to stay together? Let's sleep in separate rooms. It's okay. My parents are very democratic. No, I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think other people would stay with their boyfriends the first time they meet their parents. When Shinjuya saw Yi Chanchan's insistence, he thought for a moment and said, all right then. I'll go to a hotel with you. You're going too? Yes. Why don't you sleep next to me? I have an empty room next to mine. Sister Manting used to live there but it's empty now. That isn't appropriate. Yi Chanchan blinked and felt even more uncomfortable. Then we'll go to a hotel. But do you think my parents will think we eloped? Yi Chanchan was speechless. After thinking about it, he finally decided to stay in Shin Manting's room. After informing his parents, Shinjuya took the key and opened the door for Yi Chanchan. He took a clean bed and laid it on the bed. After tidying up the room a little, he allowed Yi Chanchan to move in. The room was very clean, even though it had not been occupied for a long time and had no smell. On the bedside table was a photo of Shin Manting. She looked particularly beautiful and alluring. She was sitting in front of the piano and smiling elegantly. Shin Manting was indeed very pretty. No wonder Shin Luo and couldn't control himself. However, it was such a fate, Yi Chanchan thought of Shin Manting. She looked at Shinjuya and asked, I heard that Shin Manting was an orphan brought back by grandmother. She was already a big girl when she was brought back. Why did grandmother suddenly want to bring a girl back to be her granddaughter? Shinjuya was surprised. I didn't expect you to be interested in this. Sitting by Yi Chanchan's bedside, Shinjishua said, it's all because of superstitions. They say that Sister Manting is blessed with good fortune and that her horoscope is very similar to my older sister's. The Great Lock of the Soul officially changed its name to Restricted Hidden Marriage, Pampering Your Sweet Wife 99 Times. Chapter 1831. Horoscope. Yes, horoscope. Shinjuya looked at the photo on the bedside table and said, Grandma is very strange sometimes. Sometimes she looks at people's faces and palms, but Sister Manting looks at horoscope. How did Grandma get her horoscope? Grandma went to the orphanage to look for it. Shinjuya glanced at Yi Chanchan with a strange expression on his face. He said, Grandmother always believed that her granddaughter was still alive. She said that if her granddaughter could come back, she would have no regrets in her life. She searched for her for more than 20 years. If she's still alive, she'd be about 28 or 29 years old now. So Grandma went to the orphanage to look for an orphan of that age? Yes, but because of this horoscope, she found Sister Manting. Based on her horoscope? Yes, she found her. After she brought her back to the capital, she did a paternity test and found that she wasn't our child. Yi Chanchan was speechless. But Shin Manting is already an adult. Why did she come back with Grandma? Yi Chanchan had automatically changed from your grandmother to Grandma. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed like a curse. She was still in school at that time, and an orphan's tuition had to be sponsored. Sister Manting's expenses were relatively high. When she first came back, she was dressed well, but she was too skinny. Later on, she became even more beautiful. So, she was seduced because she had ulterior motives? Maybe she wanted a better life, so she left with Grandma. Or maybe she just wanted a family. Shinjuya held Yi Chanchan's hand and said with sympathy and regret, she was too lonely living. Achoo. It was a scorching hot day, but Shin Manting sneezed. It was late, but the stack of papers was still unmarked. Shin Manting's eyelids were fighting to stay open. She yawned and suddenly felt the little guy kick her in the stomach. Shin Manting's yawn was interrupted, but her lips were filled with a happy smile. Shin Manting gently stroked her belly. Her heart was warm. Fortunately, the baby was with her now. Finally, it was 11:30 p.m. Shin Manting tidied up the papers and put them away before walking into her small bathroom. Ever since old Mrs. Shin's last visit, Shin Manting had gritted her teeth and changed her residence. From the easternmost side of the village to the westernmost side, he even specifically told the villagers that if anyone came to look for him, they must tell them that he had moved away. The people who lived there were all uncles and aunties. Shin Manting had a close relationship with them, so they were very willing to help her with this small favor. Although the monthly rent was 100 yuan, the small house was bigger and closer to the town, so she could earn some extra money from the summer cram school. Speaking of which, it was a blessing in disguise. After taking a shower, Shin Manting felt extremely sleepy. Shin Manting's 5-month-old belly was not obvious on her tall and strong body. It was just that his waist was a little sore sometimes, but other than that it was not a big problem. Fortunately, the baby was very obedient and only vomited a few times. Chapter 1832. It was a 15-minute drive from the town to the village. It was not far, but it was not close either. Shen Manting paid the fare and someone immediately offered her a seat. After thanking the driver, Shen Manting arrived at her destination without a hitch. The scenery along the road was beautiful, and the morning air in the countryside was refreshing. When she arrived at the town, Shen Manting got out of the car and went to the summer cram school with her test paper. However, she didn't expect to see a familiar figure at the door before she entered the school. A tall man was leaning against the stone pillar at the door of the cram school with a cigarette between his fingers. The smoke was rising, and it was hard to see his face clearly under the glaring sun. When he saw Shen Manting coming over, the man straightened up, put out the cigarette and walked over slowly. Shen Manting felt as if her heart was hit hard by something, and she almost suffocated. She stepped back and almost at the same time, Shen Manting wanted to escape. Shen Luoan's eyes darkened, and he shouted in a low voice, "Shen Manting." However, when Shen Manting heard his voice, she quickened her steps. Shen Luo and rushed forward and reached Shen Manting in a few steps. He grabbed Shen Manting's arm. "Ah!" Shen Manting screamed and struggled frantically. Shen Luo and held her down with both hands and whispered, "That's enough. Calm down." Shen Manting couldn't stand it anymore. Her heart was pounding like a hammer and she shouted, "Let me go. Who are you?" The cram school was located in the bustling area of the town, and there were many people coming and going. When they heard the shout, many people looked over. Someone recognized Shen Manting and immediately came over and shouted, "What are you doing? Let go. Everyone catch him." Shen Luoan's face darkened when he heard that and he shouted, "I'm her husband and I'm here to take her home." "I'm not. He's not." Shen Manting shouted loudly, "I don't know him at all. Let me go." Shen Manting's words made the people around more vigilant. They all came over and said, "What are you doing? Are you trying to abduct a woman? I've seen this kind of scam many times. You can't fool me." A rough man came up and threatened. Shen Luo and was a weak doctor who spent most of his time in the operating room and laboratory. How could he deal with such a situation? When Shen Manting saw more and more people around, she felt relieved. She looked at Shen Luo and then shouted angrily, "Let me go or you'll be in serious trouble." "Manting, let's talk." Compared to Shen Manting, Shen Luo and was much calmer. "The child can't live without a father. Let's talk first. Whether you want to go back with me or not is up to you. Tell them to go away first." This kind of formation was indeed a little terrifying. Shen Manting looked around at the many men who had gathered around and were ready to make a move. She knew that this was no joke. Pursing her lips, she nodded and said, "I'm sorry, big brothers. He is the father of my child." But he was not her husband, much less her lover. When the surrounding people heard this, they were also suspicious. They said, "Big sister, don't be afraid of him. We're all trained. Just shout and we'll help you take care of him." "No need, no need. I'm serious. Thank you, brother." Upon hearing Shen Manting's words, the men walked away. Shen Luo and looked at Shen Manting with cold eyes. He glanced at her belly and said, "You've grown up. You're pregnant with my child, yet you don't want to live a good life. What are you doing in this shabby place?" Chapter 1833. When Shen Manting heard this, she stared at Shen Luo and then sneered, "How do you know this child is yours? Shen Luo, and you think too highly of yourself, don't you?" "Not mine." Shen Luo and took a step forward and his eyes were very gloomy. "Then whose is it?" "It's none of your business. Anyway, it's not yours." Shen Manting's eyes were very cold. She looked at the man in front of her and felt only sarcasm in her heart. "What? After coming out of prison, you finally want to be a human being? Wasn't I a human being before? You have always been a beast." Shen Manting's tone was harsh and she sneered coldly. Shen Luo and was not annoyed. He looked at her calmly and asked, "If I am a beast, then what is it that is being pressed by a beast?" Shen Manting gritted her teeth and subconsciously stroked her belly. She whispered angrily, "Don't talk nonsense with me. What do you want?" "Take my child home." Shen Luo and put his hands in his pockets and looked at Shen Manting. "Anyway, this child will be my first child. I don't want him to live outside without a name. I said this is not your child." Shen Manting looked at Shen Luo and with a sarcastic smile. "Do you think I will keep a child for you? You are too naive, Shen Luo-han." He gritted his teeth and sneered, You can't change anything even if you talk big. Come back with me. I'll give you a good life. It'll be better than before. You can have whatever you want. Shen Luo and knew that Shen Manting was speaking out of anger, but he couldn't help getting angry. No need. Shen Manting looked at Shen Luo, and as if she was looking at a fool. Why do you think I will go back with you? To tell you the truth, every time after sex I will take the morning after pill, so it can't be your child. Shen Luo and tightly pursed his lips and stared at Shen Manting, trying to see a little guilt on her face. But Shen Manting's expression at the moment was full of sarcasm, as if she was laughing at him for overestimating himself and laughing at his wishful thinking. Shen Luo An's anger surged. He gritted his teeth and growled, "You're courting death. That's strange. If it's not your child, then it's seeking death?" The sarcastic smile on Shen Manting's face became even more radiant. She said, "I shouldn't have anything to do with you in the first place, brother." He stared at Shen Manting's bare face. Even though she didn't have any makeup on, her facial features were still very delicate. His complexion did not look too good, and his lips were a little pale. However, it was this face that made Shen Luoan's heart clench in pain. Shen Manting wasn't supposed to be like this. She was like a canary in his cage. Every day she was bright and beautiful. Every move she made had an infinitely enchanting elegance. Now, in this small place, she had become a pregnant woman in the countryside. It shouldn't have happened. But what he shouldn't have done the most was that she had called him brother. Brother? Shen Luo and put his hands in his pockets and took a step forward. Have you ever seen a brother and sister in bed? I hadn't seen it before I met you. After I met you, I realized that there are more than just people in the world who walk on their feet, Shen Manting sneered. It turns out that there are also some beasts in human clothing. Chapter 1834. Do you think you can finish scolding me? Shen Manting curled her lips and was about to enter the cram school. I can't finish scolding you. This child has nothing to do with you. If you don't have anything else to say, you should go back. I think our relationship is a little awkward now. It's better not to see each other, lest my husband sees us and causes unnecessary misunderstandings. You have a husband? Shen Luo and frowned and asked sharply, when did this happen? Do I need to report to you when I have a husband? Shen Manting's face turned cold. Who do you think you are? Shen Luo and suppressed his anger and said calmly, forget it. I'm not here to quarrel with you today. If you have something to do, you go ahead. I'll wait for you here. Don't wait for me. I also have a serious job. I have to work here until night. You're a pregnant woman. You have to work until night? Can't a pregnant woman work until night? Shen Manting's expression didn't look good. She turned around and left. Work in the cram school was actually very easy. The students who came to the cram school were from relatively well-off families in the town or children who didn't have good grades. They were usually between the ages of 8 to 15, and the boys were more mischievous. Therefore, Shen Manting only graded homework in the office, helped with the grading of test papers, and occasionally took over when the teacher took a break. However, Shen Manting was a little absent-minded at work today. The thought that Shen Luo and might be waiting for her outside made her feel uncomfortable. She was nervous and afraid. Shen Luo and was a person that she had to guard against. Shen Manting subconsciously stroked her belly. Her heart was beating very fast. What should we do? Baby, your father is coming to take us back. Yi Qianshan rested in Shen Manting's room for the night and woke up early the next day. She looked at the time. It was only 7 o'clock. She looked around the room. It was very simple. The cabinet at the bedside was locked. There must be something important in it. Yi Qianshan was always curious about Shen Manting. This woman had a lot of stories and was very courageous. She chose to escape after knowing that she was pregnant. She went all the way to a small village in Jiangnan. When Shinjilia told her about it the night before, Yi Qianshan was shocked. If it had been him, he might have just aborted the child or simply made a compromise and stayed in this place. After all, the Shen family seemed to treat her quite well. It was only after these thoughts flashed through her mind that she suddenly remembered that there was still Shen Luo Han. Forget it, I'll take back what I just said. She got up and found a new set of toiletries in the bathroom of the suite. After cleaning herself up, she changed into a clean set of clothes and walked out. Outside, Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen were already sitting at the dining table. Shen Longyue was reading the newspaper, while Mrs. Shen was carefully spreading jam on the bread. Hello, Uncle Auntie. When Mrs. Shen saw Yi Qianshan walking out of Shen Manting's room, she was a little surprised and asked, Jilia? You're still asleep, aren't you? Yi Qianshan glanced behind her. Chapter 1835. Yi Qianshan felt that something was amiss and asked, "Yes. What's wrong?" "It's nothing. It's just that Manting's room has been vacant for a long time. Why is Julia living there?" He didn't even ask Nanny He to clean it up. "It's all right, Auntie. It's quite clean and comfortable inside. Julia brought me a set of clean bedding. I lay down and fell asleep." Yi Qianshan smiled innocently. Mrs. Shen's expression visibly relaxed. This made Yi Qianshan even more curious. Was there something in Shen Manting's room that couldn't be seen by others? Everyone in the family was having breakfast. Nanny He went to Shenjulia's room to call for him. She called him twice before there was a response. After about 10 minutes, Shenjulia came out in his pajamas. He looked like he had just woken up. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, Nanny He." Shenjulia yawned and said, "Good morning, wife." Yi Qianshan was a little embarrassed. In the words of Northerners, wife was equivalent to wife. Yi Qianshan blushed slightly. She sat by the side and took the breakfast that Nanny He had prepared for her without saying a word. Shenjulia sat next to Yi Qianshan naturally. He glanced at her and asked, "Where's Grandma?" "She's still in the room. I just went to call her, but she seems to be in the middle of a divination," Nanny He whispered. "Old people always think too much. You young people don't have to worry so much. This is the era of science. It's better not to believe in such superstitious things." "We won't believe it. No matter what, Grandma has ruined my brother and sister Manting. I won't believe in such nonsense again." Shenjulia took the breakfast that Nanny He handed him and asked, "By the way, where has my brother been recently? I heard that he's on a business trip." "Who knows? He often disappears without a trace." Shen Longyue was reading the newspaper. When he spoke, he put the newspaper away and said, "Take good care of Qianshan. Since she's pregnant, there are some things that you have to pay attention to. I have an important meeting in the next 2 days, so I have to go on a business trip. The day after tomorrow, we'll visit Qianshan's house and propose marriage." Yi Qianshan couldn't react. Was she pregnant? She felt guilty and glanced at Shenjulia. She didn't know what Shenjulia's skin was made of, but he looked very calm. He nodded his head and said, "Sure. Qianshan still has to go back to work. She'll be returning to Kingstown tomorrow. I have to go back to the hospital and apply for leave." "All right, you guys go first. Your mother and I will be there the day after tomorrow." "What are you going to do the day after tomorrow?" An old voice with a bit of vitality could be heard. The old lady walked over and said, "What do you want to do?" "Grandma, it's time for dinner," Shenjulia called out. At the same time, he nudged Yi Qianshan. Yi Qianshan immediately called out, "Grandma?" Old Mrs. Shen didn't look too happy and said, "You want to propose the day after tomorrow? Betrothal gifts?" "Yes, Mom. Please sit down and talk." Mrs. Shen stood up and pulled out a stool for old Mrs. Shen. "No, I don't agree." Old Mrs. Shen shoved the stool back. "Qianshan has a short lifeline on her hand. Of all the places to put it, it just had to be on her lifeline. Mom, what era is it now? Do you still believe in such things? It's fine as long as the child likes it." Chapter 1836. Old Mrs. Shen's words were very direct. As she spoke, she looked at Shen Longyue with an unhappy expression. Yi Qianshan felt a little awkward. She had heard from Yi Yuyu that if the old lady didn't like someone, she could be very merciless. Previously, when she liked Yu Lily, Yi Qianshan hadn't noticed this characteristic of the old lady. But now, Yi Qianshan had witnessed it clearly and had no choice but to believe it. However, to Yi Qianshan's surprise, Shenjulia had previously said that he didn't have much of a love life. She had never believed him. Now that she had received confirmation from the old lady, Yi Qianshan couldn't help but look at Shenjulia again. "How can you curse someone like that? Qianshan is fine now because of your curse." Shenjulia looked a little angry. It was fine in the first place. Qianshan has always been living well. Now, you want her to die at 28 years old with just one sentence. How can you do this? "Julia, I don't want to do this either. I know that it's rare for you to like a girl, but I'm just playing it safe." Shenjulia pursed his lips and didn't say another word. He stood up and took Yi Qianshan's hand to leave. When old Mrs. Shen saw this, she panicked and yelled, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to have my fortune read to see if it's as mysterious as you say." Shenjulia took Yi Qianshan's hand and walked away from the dining table in a few steps. When old Mrs. Shen heard that, she snorted and said, "Do you still need others at a time like this? The experts that I, your granny, know are all over the place. How could your people have met my wife? They just listen to what you say," Shenjulia said. Shenjulia was a little annoyed. "I think she's very good. She even brought you a gift. She's not bad to you. Why do you have to slander her like this? What do you mean slander? If I hadn't read her fortune, would I have said that to you? Why didn't you read Lily's palm at that time? Lily's physiognomy is very good. You can tell at a glance what her fortune is like. But when Chanchan first came in, you said she had the face of wealth. She did have the face of wealth, but her life was short. Old Mrs. Shun said matter-of-factly. I can't let you marry a short-lived woman. You're so stubborn. If she really dies. Bah. Shinjilia was furious. Grandma, as an elder, you're cursing the younger generation. You're also a self-proclaimed half-immortal. Don't you know that's a taboo? Old Mrs. Shun was speechless. Grandma, Yi Chanchan suddenly spoke up. She looked at old Mrs. Shun and said, what you're saying is that I'm destined to live a life of riches and honor, and that I'm destined to die young, right? That's what I think, and that's the conclusion I got from my old friend. Old Mrs. Shun looked at Yi Chanchan with pity in her eyes. It's not that I don't like you, but Argelia. Chapter 1837. Yi Chanchan's words were clear. She pulled out all of her family's wealth and laid it out in front of them. Shinjilia silently hugged Yi Chanchan tightly and comforted her. Yi Chanchan glanced at Shinjilia and continued, when I was in high school my grandmother contracted a very serious illness. At that time she underwent continuous chemotherapy for several years. After struggling for several years she finally couldn't take it anymore and passed away. At that time our family was in dire straits. I had to work outside to be able to pay for my normal living and school fees. When I was in college I almost dropped out, but my best friend helped me. That's why I'm where I am today. Grandma, does this kind of fate count as a life of wealth to you? Yi Chanchan's words were very firm. She looked at old Mrs. Shun, and every word that came out of her mouth was unquestionable. Old Mrs. Shun frowned when she heard that. Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shun were a little moved when they heard that. It's not easy for anyone to live in this world. I started from scratch, but your grandmother still said that I didn't accomplish anything in my life. Shen Longyue took a sip of milk and said with a sigh, although your grandmother wasn't a psychic back then, she still went to ask her old friends and came to the conclusion. There's no difference. Longyue, how can you talk about your mother like that? Mom, times are different now. Don't believe in such things anymore. Shen Longyue looked helpless. Jilia isn't young anymore. It's not easy for him to find a girl he likes. Why do you have to break them up? You've said it yourself that doing such a thing will shorten your lifespan. It's my own grandson. It doesn't matter if my life is shortened. I'm doing it for Jilia's sake. I don't believe in such things. Shinjilia held Yi Chanchan in his arms. Let's go. Shinjilia. Shinjilia ignored her and led Yi Chanchan into his room. Yi Chanchan looked at Shinjilia and asked, do you really not believe it? Shinjilia rummaged through his closet and took out a set of casual clothes. He looked at Yi Chanchan and said, of course not. Didn't I tell you last night? But I think it's better to believe in these things. He turned to look at Yi Chanchan as if he had seen a ghost and asked, Yi Chanchan, do you really think you're going to die? Yi Chanchan turned her head away in embarrassment and said softly, actually, someone has said something like that before. Shinjilia frowned. He looked at Yi Chanchan and waited for her to continue. Right in front of our town there's a blind man. We call him Uncle Blind Man. Uncle Blind Man is possessed by a god. It's said that he can invite both gods and ghosts. He read your fortune for you? Not really. I thought he was just joking. What did he say? He said, the little girl's life isn't bad, but you have to be careful of villains and be careful of your life. Did he really say that? I don't remember the specifics, but that's the general idea. Shinjilia was silent for a moment. He took off his clothes and put on a shirt before saying, let's go back to Yuntown and get to the bottom of this. Can't we wait until tomorrow? Didn't they say that they would register their marriage on Monday? Chapter 1838. I'm going to get the household registration booklet, Shinjilia said softly as he held Yi Chanchan's head in his hands. We're going to get our marriage certificate tomorrow. Your grandfather passed away and I haven't visited him yet. I'll go pay my respects tomorrow. Yi Chanchan was stunned. How did you know? Your sister told me about it yesterday. Shinjilia's eyes were filled with guilt. I'm sorry. It's just a quarrel. I shouldn't have ignored what's going on around you. If you hadn't told me about it yesterday, I'm afraid I wouldn't have known about it today. Yi Chanchan pursed her lips, suddenly feeling a little sad. She opened her arms and hugged Shinjilia. In a soft voice she said, it's not your fault. It's all my fault. I didn't trust you. Shinjilya rested his chin on her head and whispered, Chan, no matter what happens in the future, you must trust me. As long as you ask me, I won't lie to you. Yes. If I've done anything wrong to you, you're welcome to stab me to death with a knife. Yi Chan burst out laughing. She slapped him on the chest and said coquettishly, Go away. If I stab you to death, I'll have to go to jail. Shinjilya smiled and gently released her. He packed a few simple clothes and stuffed them into Yi Chanchan's suitcase. Then Shinjilya dashed into his parents' room, flipped through the household register and snuck back. When Yi Chanchan and Shinjilya walked out, old Mrs. Shun was having breakfast. Seeing that they were carrying a bag, he immediately became alert and asked, Where are you going? I'll leave first. Grandma, uncle, auntie, thank you for your hospitality. Yi Chanchan smiled and said, I have to work tomorrow. If I rush back today, I'll be able to work tomorrow. Where's Jilya? Of course I'm sending her to the airport. While he was at it, he could also go to Cloud Town for a walk. However, Shinjilya didn't finish his sentence. He simply picked up Yi Chanchan's suitcase and walked out. The two of them hailed a taxi and arrived at the airport in about 50 minutes. After buying the nearest ticket to Cloud Town Airport, the two quickly boarded the plane. When they arrived at Cloud Town, it was around 11 o'clock in the afternoon. The two of them ate something on the plane and went straight home. Some people in town were surprised to see Yi Chanchan. However, when they saw the young man beside her, they began to talk among themselves. Isn't that Yi Chanchan's ex-boyfriend? The one who did that to Fong Tong Tong? I don't think so. They did that kind of thing and they're still together? If that's not the case, then she's changing men too quickly. Of course, Yi Chanchan also noticed the gazes around them, but she didn't care. She pulled Shinjilya along and headed home. When they entered the house, Yi Zhenhua was very surprised. He looked at Yi Chanchan and Shinjilya and exclaimed, You? Why are you together again? Didn't we break up? Yi Chanchan was a little embarrassed. She coughed lightly and said, I'm fine again. Yi Zhenhua looked at his daughter's blushing face and found it strange. He looked at Shinjilya with a faint smile and asked, You're here? He's here. Shinjilya smiled brightly, revealing 8 neat, white teeth. Uncle, I'm here to pay my respects to Grandpa. Yeah. Yi Zhenhua put down the flowers in his hand and led Shinjilya inside. Grandpa's morning hall was set up in the living room. The moment he entered, he could smell the incense. Chapter 1839. Hello, Grandpa. Shinjilya knelt down as well. I'm Xiaoxin. I'm sorry that I didn't come to see you one last time when you passed away. But don't worry, I'll treat your granddaughter well in the future. I won't let Chanchan be bullied. I swear here. After Shinjilya finished speaking, he placed the incense sticks in the ground and kowtowed 3 times. Yi Zhenhua looked at Shinjilya intently and said, I hope you're not making empty promises. Although Chanchan is a girl, she's still a treasure in our family. Don't worry, Uncle. I'll treat Chanchan well. I'm here now to tell you that I've already spoken to my family. My father said that he'll come to propose marriage in 2 days, but I want to register my marriage with Chanchan first. Shinjilya sounded very sincere when he said this. He stared at Yi Zhenhua and almost called him Dad. Yi Chanchan felt a little uneasy. She was still concerned about what Shinjilya's grandmother had said. What if she really couldn't live past the age of 28? What should she do? Moreover, according to old Mrs. Shen, it seemed that it would be very difficult for her to get pregnant. Yi Chanchan felt a little sad. She looked at Shinjilya's sincere eyes and suddenly felt that it was a little unfair to him. Old Shin, Yi Chanchan called out, interrupting Shinjilya's words. Shinjilya looked over, and Yi Zhenhua also turned his head to look at his daughter. Yi Chanchan looked at Shinjilya and said, Let's talk first. Shinjilya had a bad feeling about this. He looked at Yi Chanchan and asked, What do you want to say? Come with me. Yi Chanchan pulled Shinjilya out of the room. Shinjilya was pulled away. When he saw Yi Chanchan's solemn expression, he felt that something was wrong. Yi Chanchan pulled him into the room. Shinjilya stared at her and asked, What do you want to say? I think. When Yi Chanchan saw Shinjilya talking to her father, she felt that she had a lot to say. But now she couldn't say a word. Huh? Shinjilya raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? I think there must be some basis to what your grandmother said. After all, this kind of thing is superstition, but hasn't China believed in this for 5,000 years? It's best if it's not true, but if it's true and I really die at 28, then? Enough. Shinjilya's expression darkened. Yi Chanchan, what do you think I like about you? Yi Qianshan couldn't react for a moment. You're so timid. Do you really believe what Grandma said? Yi Qianshan didn't say anything. Her attitude was equivalent to a silent agreement. Shenjilia grew even angrier. He said, even if you're really dead, I'll accept it. Who asked me to choose this path? But, Shenjilia emphasized the last two words. Grandma's words can't be trusted. I've never believed Grandma's words. She even told me a bunch of nonsense about fortune-telling. She told me how great I'd be in this life and how beautiful my future wife would be. But look in the mirror now. Is she beautiful? Shenjilia's eyes widened. The corners of Yi Qianshan's eyes twitched. She couldn't react for a moment. She said that the child I gave birth to would be smart, but look at yourself. With your genes, do you think you can be smart? Chapter 1840. Shenjilia held her down and said, I'm just giving you an example. Look, it turns out that grandmother's words aren't accurate. Sometimes you're just unlucky. It's just a coincidence. We're not married yet. Who can guarantee that I'm the wife your grandmother said you're going to marry? Besides, grandmother said it's difficult for me to have children. I think, your wife might not be me but someone else. Shenjilia lost his temper. A sense of helplessness and defeat engulfed him from the bottom of his heart. Yi Qianshan, do you really believe grandmother's words? Yi Qianshan pouted. She seemed to be acting coquettishly and aggrieved. I don't want to believe it either, but didn't she say that Yu would have a second marriage? Didn't it come true? I think, she forced Yu to divorce my brother. Is she going to let her die alone? A second marriage is only a matter of time. Is that so? Yi Qianshan didn't quite believe him. However, when she saw the obvious unhappy expression on Shenjilia's face, she nodded and said, that seems to make sense. Anyway, I don't believe in that. Shenjilia reached out and pinched Yi Qianshan's face. You're not allowed to believe it either. Didn't you say that there's a blind uncle in town? Let's go take a look. Now. Yeah. Shenjilia pulled her. Since we're already here, we'll naturally go look for the blind uncle after paying our respects to grandfather. All right. Let's go buy some gifts. Yi Qianshan walked into the house and picked up her purse. She was a little hesitant. What's wrong? Yi Qianshan looked very uncomfortable. She looked at Shenjilia and said, on our way to the blind uncle's house, we'll pass by a small shop. We can buy some gifts on the way. Let's go then. Shenjilia didn't notice the problem. But that small shop is owned by Fang Tongtong. Yi Qianshan smiled, but there was a hint of awkwardness in her smile. She said, why don't we take a detour? It'll be awkward if we see her. What's there to be awkward about? Shenjilia glanced at her. We're going to show her what we look like now. Shenjilia straightened his clothes and pulled Yi Qianshan out. Wait a minute. Yi Qianshan tugged at him. Don't you know what happened to Tong Tong? How could I not know? I'm one of the people involved. Shenjilia found it funny and smiled. She confessed to you afterward, didn't she? No. Yi Qianshan could tell that Shenjilia didn't seem to know anything about Fang Tongtong. She struggled for a moment and looked at Shenjilia. She suddenly found it difficult to speak. Shenjilia raised his eyebrows slightly. What are you trying to say? It's, when my grandfather passed away, she came to look for me. Huh? She said some disgusting things to me, so I chased her away. Well done. But something happened to her on her way home. Yi Qianshan's expression was grave, and Shenjilia could vaguely sense that things were not as simple as they seemed. There's a high school classmate in our town. Some time ago he came back to the town to settle down. His father has some mental problems. When he was young, his wife ran away with someone. That day, for some reason, he was squatting in the woods. When Tong Tong passed by, he dragged her in, and then. Chapter 1841. Yeah. Shenjilia's calm voice rang out. He didn't seem to have much emotion in it. Shenjilia looked down at Yi Qianshan and said softly, I know. Yi Qianshan was stunned and looked up. Shenjilia clearly saw the sadness in Yi Qianshan's eyes. He reached out and gently caressed her face. You told me yourself. Have you forgotten? Yi Qianshan didn't react. I told you? Yeah. Shenjilia seemed a little helpless. A few days ago when you called me for the first time, you told me. Is that so? Yi Qianshan suddenly remembered and nodded. Yes, I told you. You told me that Fang Tongtong cried a lot after the incident, and her mother was also very sad. That's what you said. Yeah. Do you know why I called you at that time? What? When Fang Tongtong's accident happened, it was the second day after my grandfather passed away. I went to the hospital to visit her a few times. She was in a very bad state at that time. During the examination, the doctor said that she had a torn vagina. Shinjulia looked at Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian felt a little guilty. She lowered her head and said, "After she was discharged from the hospital and grandfather's funeral was over, I returned to Kingstown the next day. That's why I called you." "So, after you found out that I never had sex with her, you wanted to get back together with me, right?" Yi Qianqian blushed, but she still braced herself and nodded honestly. Shinjulia took a deep breath. He didn't know whether he was angry or helpless. He raised his hand and waved it to the side, but he didn't know what to do. Yi Qianqian quickly pressed his hand down and said, I was wrong." "Well, that's good too. At least the facts proved my innocence." Shinjulia sighed and said, "But it's a pity for Fang Tong Tong. I didn't expect her to be a virgin." "Yeah." Yi Qianqian felt a little sorry for her. "But it's still necessary for us to show our faces. These are two separate matters. We're just going out to buy something. It's not like we're deliberately provoking her. Let's go." Shinjulia held Yi Qianqian's hand and headed out. Yi Qianqian was dumbfounded. She was dragged along by him. When Yi Qianqian arrived at the entrance of Fang Tongtong's shop, she looked at the store that she had not seen in a long time. She felt a little sour in her heart. Shinjulia didn't feel too emotional. He pulled Yi Qianqian forward and stood in front of it, looking around. Fang Tongtong was stunned when she saw them. Yi Qianqian smiled and waved at her. "Hi," Shinjulia asked, "do you have candy? The kind that comes in a gift box." When Fang Tongtong heard Shinjulia's words, she felt a little upset. Fang Tongtong pursed her lips and stood up. She replied, "I do. What flavor do you want?" "Whatever, as long as you can give it to someone." Shinjulia acted as if he didn't know her. "I'm going to look for the blind uncle that Qianqian mentioned. I'm going to ask for his horoscope so that I can propose marriage in a few days." Fang Tongtong's hand, which was in the middle of retrieving the candy, shrank back. She was a little annoyed. When he turned his head, he saw Yi Qianqian tugging at Shinjulia. "Are you guys getting married?" Fang Tongtong asked. Shinjulia raised his eyebrows slightly. "Yeah. Didn't you say that you didn't want to get married? Why are you thinking about it now?" Fang Tongtong asked as she looked at Yi Qianqian. Chapter 1842. When Shinjulia said this, he raised his eyebrows slightly, and his smile was still as bright as the sun. Just like when they first met. However, the current Fang Tongtong was no longer the Fang Tongtong of the past. Yi Qianqian looked at Fang Tongtong's obviously unhappy expression. She tugged at Shinjulia and said, "Tongtong, I feel that we're not young anymore. Since we're going to get married sooner or later, I wanted to ask about candy?" "Yeah." Fang Tongtong placed the box of candy in front of them and placed it in a nice-looking bag. "Take it. You don't have to give it back. That won't do. Favors are favors and business is business." Shinjulia took out his wallet. "I'm a person who likes to be clear about things." Yi Qianqian felt that there was something wrong with Shinjulia, but she couldn't tell what it was. There seemed to be nothing wrong with his every move and every word. Shinjulia took out a $100 bill and placed it on the counter. "How much is it?" Fang Tongtong looked at the bill and felt even more uncomfortable. She pushed the bill back. "I've stayed in your house for a few days and I haven't paid rent yet. It's only a few dozen dollars. Take it." Shinjulia looked at her. Fang Tongtong's eyes were a little red, and he could vaguely see her embarrassment. "All right." Shinjulia took the money back. "Thank you." As he spoke, Shinjulia picked up the box of candy and turned to leave. Yi Qianqian looked at Fang Tongtong with a complicated expression. She sighed in her heart. After thinking about it, she said, "Then, we'll leave first." "Yeah," Fang Tongtong replied dryly as she watched them leave. After they left, a shout came from inside the house. "Tongtong, it's time to eat." Fang Tongtong stared ahead and said after a while, "Mom, Qianqian is getting married." When Mrs. Fang heard this, she walked out and said in disbelief, "So soon? Didn't she just break up with her man?" "They're dating again. They just came to buy candy together and said they wanted to go to Uncle Blind Man's place to get their horoscope." Mrs. Fang was a little surprised. How can this girl talk about marriage in the year her grandfather passed away? It's inauspicious. You have to remind her. But after saying that, he suddenly thought of something. He looked at his daughter and said, "Forget it. In any case, it has nothing to do with us. Let's eat. It's all done." "Yeah." Fang Tongtong stood up and headed inside. Yi Qianqian rarely visited the area. Although she knew that the blind uncle lived in the area, She didn't know which house he lived in. Along the way he finally found the place where Uncle Blind was. The blind uncle lived in a one-story bungalow. The outside of the bungalow was rough. As soon as he walked in, he was amazed by the antique style inside. Before he even entered the door, he could already smell the thick scent of incense. There was a praying mat inside, and on top of it was an altar, on which various bodhisattvas were enshrined. Yi Qianshan didn't know much about it. She only recognized Guanyin Bodhisattva, Manjushri Bodhisattva, and Sakyamuni Buddha. As for the rest, Yi Qianshan only saw their appearances and didn't know their names. He's here. Yi Qianshan was startled when she heard a slightly hoarse voice. A short figure with a stooped back walked out from the inside slowly. Chapter 1843. Uncle Blind Man's eyes were devoid of any darkness. Yi Qianshan was a little frightened at first glance. Shenjulia calmed down a little. He glanced at Yi Qianshan and said, "Is this Uncle Blind Man?" His voice was very soft. Yi Qianshan nodded her head. Uncle Blind Man chuckled softly. "I knew you would come. Do you find it a little hard to accept?" He was speaking in the dialect of Yun Town. Shenjulia didn't quite understand, but Yi Qianshan's expression immediately changed. She looked into Uncle Blind Man's eyes with some lingering fear. She seemed to be very nervous and asked, "Uncle, how did you know I would come today?" "Buddha told me." Uncle Blind Man's expression was natural. There was no darkness in his eyes, but at that moment Yi Qianshan felt that he had seen through everything. With this realization, Yi Qianshan felt a little creeped out. "Don't be afraid. Come in and have a seat." Uncle Blind Man turned around and walked briskly. He crossed one threshold after another, passed through the temple and finally reached the hall inside. Yi Qianshan held Shenjulia's hand and followed him in. As she walked, she felt more and more strange. Shenjulia was still holding the candy in his hand. Yi Qianshan saw it and picked it up. "Uncle, I brought you some candy. I'll put it on the table for you." "That's very kind of you, good girl." Uncle Blind Man took out 2 stools from inside. They were invisible, but they didn't bump into anything along the way. "Have a seat." Shenjulia found it a little strange, so he didn't stand on ceremony and sat down. Uncle Blind Man walked in front of Yi Qianshan and said, "Give me your hand." Yi Qianshan's heart was beating fast. She stretched out her right hand. There was a red line on this hand. The red line happened to cross the lifeline, and it crossed the career and marriage lines diagonally. Uncle Blind Man caressed Yi Qianshan's hand. He touched the back of her hand and then the palm of her hand. Shenjulia watched from the side and his brows furrowed. "That's not right." If Uncle Blind Man hadn't been blind, Shenjulia would probably have thought that he was taking advantage of Yi Qianshan. 8 characters. The old and steady voice was hoarse. This time Shenjulia understood. Yi Qianshan immediately told him her horoscope. The blind uncle nodded and said, "My fate is good. My 8 characters are wonderful. I was born at the most auspicious time of the year. If I was born 2 hours earlier or 2 hours later, it would be a great misfortune. This is fate." Yi Qianshan had always believed in such things. When she heard what he said, she actually felt a little scared. "Bring prosperity to your husband and children, bring prosperity to your father and mother, but not to your in-laws. If you get married, don't live with your in-laws. You have to be careful of villains." When Yi Qianshan heard that, she immediately understood what was going on. Could it be Shenjulia's grandmother? Other than Shenjulia's grandmother, it seemed that everyone else in the Shen family was pretty good. "Uncle," Yi Qianshan said, "some elders say that I'll live a short life. What do you think?" "Beware of villains. If the villains succeed, you might become infertile." Yi Qianshan's heart skipped a beat. Those words seemed to match up with what the old lady had said. "But you don't have to worry too much. There are causes and effects in this world. If you do good and accumulate virtue, the heavens will see it." Uncle Blind Man had a smile on his face. His fingers caressed Yi Qianshan's palm. His fingers slid across her smooth palm, repeatedly touching the thin red line. 5 minutes can only be 4 minutes, there is still a midnight makeup. Chapter 1844. Shenjulia couldn't help but ask, "What is he doing?" No matter how he looked at it, Shenjulia felt that he was taking advantage of Yi Qianshan. Yi Qianshan shook her head gently at him and turned to look at her hand. Uncle Blind had a smile on his lips the entire time. "Is this your boyfriend?" "Yes, uncle. We plan to get married." "Well, you can get married, but it's not the right year," the blind man said. "Your luck isn't good this year. It's best to get married after you're 28. Yi Qianshan was shocked. 28? Yes, 28. The blind man smiled. 28 is your lucky year. You can get married before that, but your luck will be a little worse. Worse? Yes, worse. He held Yi Chanshan's hand and said, I left this thread for you. Your sister's luck isn't good, but yours is. When you were born, your father asked me to give some of your luck to her. How is your sister doing now? Yi Chanshan's eyes widened in shock. That's right. Yi Chanshan was a little dizzy. That's my sister. The blind man shook his head. She's my sister. I'm older than her by more than an hour. You were born nearly 2 hours earlier than her, but she's your sister. The blind uncle smiled amiably. It's not good for a woman to have too much luck. If you break your luck and make up for your sister's luck, then your luck will be even. But now your sister's calamity has passed, but your calamity has yet to arrive. Disaster. Yi Chanshan was a little flustered. What disaster? The blind man shook his head. I don't know. You'll know when the time comes. The time had come. When would it be the time? Yi Chanshan subconsciously glanced at Shinjilia. Shinjilia had been paying attention to them, but they had been speaking in a dialect for a long time. He still didn't know what they were talking about. Can I still get married? 28. Is the disaster a villain? It might be and it might not be. It was ambiguous. Yi Chanshan could tell that the blind man didn't know either. Her heart sank as she continued, Should I show you my boyfriend's horoscope? You can look but don't look, Uncle Blind said. There are experts in his family. Don't offend them. She hadn't said anything, but the blind uncle already knew everything. Zemachi. She said that my life would be short and I wouldn't be able to have children. The red thread in my hand was a short lifeline, but it was broken on my lifeline. I'm going to die at 28. The blind uncle chuckled and said, Not really, but it's really not good for the man's family. She deliberately exaggerated it, but it's not that serious. So she doesn't want us to be together? I don't know. Yi Chanshan sighed softly, feeling a little defeated. For a moment, it was as if she had learned a lot of things. However, she would rather not know about them. That way she would be more at ease. Young people shouldn't sigh. Good luck will be sighed away. The blind uncle patted Yi Chanshan's hand. Just wait. When the time comes, everything will be fine. Thank you, uncle. Your boyfriend likes you very much, but you have to be careful of villains. She had to be careful of villains again. How many villains did she have to be careful of? Chapter 1845. After listening to the blind uncle's words, Yi Chanshan suddenly felt as if her life had been spoiled. But when she thought about it carefully, she didn't seem to have anyone around her that she needed to guard against. Fang Tong Tong used to be her best friend, but now she didn't dare to trust her anymore. It was difficult to draw a tiger's bones just by drawing its skin. You might know a person's face but not his heart. However, what did Uncle Blind Man's last sentence mean? Don't guard against others? Was he talking about Fang Tong Tong? After chatting with the blind uncle for a while, Yi Chanshan left some money for him to buy some supplements for his health and left. After she came out, Yi Chanshan said to Shinjilia, Uncle said that we might not be able to get married this year. What? Shinjilia's expression became solemn. Why can't we get married? Is it because your grandfather passed away this year? Well, that's one of the reasons, but... Yi Chanshan pulled Shinjilia along and said as they walked, Uncle said that my luck is too good and my sister's luck is too bad, so he gave half of my luck to my sister. Now my sister's disaster is over, but my disaster has yet to come. As she spoke, she looked up at Shinjilia with an aggrieved expression and said, The disaster is coming. I might not be able to conceive. What do you mean? What disaster? Shinjilia felt that it was a fantasy. What the hell? If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have come here. I didn't understand a single word of what you said just now. You didn't translate it for me so that I could question him in person. How could I? I'd rather believe it than not. I think I should believe it. Besides, didn't your grandmother also say that I might not be able to conceive? That's impossible. Shinjilia stopped walking and turned sideways to hold her face. That's because we used to use contraception for fear of getting pregnant. Why don't we try not to use contraception in the future? Aya, now is not the time to talk about this. Yi Chanshan felt a little annoyed. Uncle has always told me to be on guard against villains. How can I have so many villains around me? Huh. Speaking of which, didn't you meet one before? Who are you talking about? Yi Chanshan looked at Shinjilia as if she had already guessed it. Is it Tong Tong? What do you think? Uncle also told me not to be too guarded against people. I think Tong Tong is still kind after all. It's just that she was a little confused about the previous matter. There will definitely not be such a thing in the future. You still want to reconcile with her? No. Yi Qianqian was a little sad. But after all, we've known each other for so many years. I think, yeah, got it. Shinjilia held her in his arms. Did he tell you who you should be wary of? Who would tell you like that? Wouldn't that be a prophecy? Was what he said before not a prophecy? Shinjilia raised his eyebrows. There's nothing different. Did he tell you what kind of disaster could cause infertility? I don't know. Yi Qianqian scratched her head. It's a villain. That's why it's the same as not saying anything. You can't say that. At the very least, I'll be on guard. Yi Qianqian held his arm. But we can't get married this year. What will happen if I get married? My luck will suffer another setback. In other words, I'll be even more unlucky. When Shinjilia heard that, he immediately gave up, but he was still a little unwilling. When can we get married? You're already 26. Chapter 1846. Shinjilia's eyes widened as he stared at Yi Qianqian, and the expression on his face became indescribable. No matter how he looked at it, the expression on Yi Qianqian's face didn't look like she was joking. After a long while, Shinjilia asked weakly, "Did that blind uncle tell you that?" "Yes," Yi Qianqian said. Yi Qianqian also hoped that it wasn't true, but the blind uncle had no reason to trick her. Nodding his head, Shinjilia looked at her and sighed. Young people shouldn't sigh. Shinjilia looked at her and raised his eyebrows slightly. Yi Qianqian repeated Uncle Blind Man's words and said, "When young people sigh, they will sigh away all their good fortune." Shinjilia smiled, but at the same time he felt a deep sense of helplessness. He held Yi Qianqian in his arms and asked, "What should we do?" "What else can I do?" Yi Qianqian hung her head. "Didn't grandmother say that I might not live past the age of 28? It's better not to get married. Otherwise, you'll have to mark me as a widower on your household register." "How ugly would that be?" Shinjilia rubbed her face and said through gritted teeth, "You're talking nonsense." She looked at Shinjilia and pouted. In a muffled voice she said, "It's 2 years. If one of us has a change of heart or has an affair, there's still a chance to turn things around." "Tiske?" Shinjilia released her face and held her in his arms. In a gentle voice he said, "In that case I should be on my guard and keep an eye on you. I can't let you have the chance to come into contact with the flowers and plants outside. Hey, I'm just afraid that you'll have a change of heart. Don't worry, it can't be me." Shinjilia's face was full of confidence. He lowered his head to look at Yi Qianqian's face and whispered, "You won't either." Yi Qianqian's heart warmed and a triumphant smile appeared on her face as she replied, "Humph, of course I won't. I'm so devoted and devoted." As she spoke, she bumped into Shinjilia. Shinjilia gently bumped into her. "Shall we go back to Kingstown?" Yi Qianqian slammed into him again and grunted. "Yeah, let's go back. We can't get married anyway." Shinjilia chuckled and opened his arms to hug her. "Isn't it just a certificate? We'll leave it at the Bureau of Civil Affairs for now. We'll take it back when we're in a better mood." Yi Qianqian was amused by him and pinched his waist. "Why are you so shameless?" "Ha, let's go back and tell your father." By the time they returned to Kingstown, it was already dark. By the time Shinjilia and Yi Qianqian arrived home in a taxi, it was already past midnight. As soon as he got out of the car, he saw a few police cars parked at the entrance of the neighborhood. Red and blue sirens flashed. Yi Qianqian looked inside, confused. Shinjilia went up to a policeman and asked, "Officer, may I ask what's going on?" The policeman glanced at him and Yi Qianqian. His eyes fell on their suitcases and he asked, "Do you live here?" "Yes, we'll stay here." The policeman quickly took out a small booklet and said, "Which building and which unit?" Can I ask what happened?" "A real gun was found in the garden of your neighborhood, and drug residue was also found on the handle of the gun. They are now doing a screening." Both of their hearts trembled when they heard this. Chapter 1847. After cooperating with the police for an investigation, Yi Qianqian and Shinjilia were registered with their identification cards and proof of residency from the property management to prove that they were residents of the neighborhood. After confirming that there was nothing out of the ordinary, they were released. The entire process took half an hour. Although it wasn't a big deal, Yi Qianqian still felt uncomfortable when she encountered such a thing. She looked up at Shinjilia and asked, "Why did this happen out of nowhere? I feel like my luck hasn't been too good recently. Why do I keep encountering such unpleasant things?" "It's okay. Don't overthink it. The more you think about it, the more unpleasant it will feel. Shinjuya patted Yi Chanchan's head. All right. Wash up and go to sleep. I'll call the hospital. I won't be going back tomorrow. You didn't ask for leave? Yi Chanchan secretly clicked her tongue. That works? Aren't you afraid that the hospital will fire you? Don't worry. The people at the hospital want me more than anything. Shinjuya patted her head. Go take a shower. Okay. Yi Chanchan stretched and found her pajamas in the room. Then she went into the bathroom. Shinjuya helped her pack her luggage and put it away before he went to do his own things. Yi Chanchan was exhausted. Her eyelids were fighting to stay open in the shower. When she was done, she saw Shinjuya on the phone on the balcony. She greeted him and went back to her room to sleep. Shinjuya's lips curled up slightly. He leaned against the railing of the balcony. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of a fire from the corner of his eye. He saw it unintentionally and it was extremely clear. Shinjuya's heart skipped a beat. When he turned his head to look, there was no trace of it. It was as if he had been hallucinating. Shinjuya immediately thought of what the police had said to them in the neighborhood. There might be a drug addict with a gun in this neighborhood. A drug addict was scary enough. If he had a gun and lost control of his emotions, it would be very dangerous. Shinjuya pursed his lips and looked around. After making sure there was nothing out of the ordinary, he closed the floor-to-ceiling windows on the balcony and entered the room. He walked into the room slowly. When he saw Yi Chanchan sleeping soundly, he felt relieved. He adjusted Yi Chanchan's sleeping position and covered her with a blanket before he went to take a shower. But halfway through, a scream came from outside. No. It was Yi Chanchan. Shinjuya made up his mind. He immediately opened the door and rushed out. Shinjuya? Yi Chanchan's voice was much softer than before. He rushed into the room barefoot and turned on the lights. She had kicked the blanket away. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her hair was slightly disheveled. Shinjuya heaved a huge sigh of relief. He stepped forward and pulled Yi Chanchan back. Yi Chanchan shuddered and snapped out of her reverie. The light in the room was a little dazzling. She squinted her eyes and saw the person in front of her clearly. Shinjuya had bubbles on his head and he wasn't wearing any clothes. When Yi Chanchan saw him, she immediately perked up. Her eyes widened as she asked, "What are you doing?" When Shinjuya saw her reaction, he was both annoyed and amused. "You scared me to death. Do you know what kind of dream you just had?" Feeling a little embarrassed, she asked, "Was I talking in my sleep?" Chapter 1848. Yi Chanchan looked at him and blushed. She gave him a kick and said, "Go wash up before you come back." Shinjuya had no choice. After washing up, he wrapped a bath towel around himself and walked out. As soon as he came back and sat on the edge of the bed, Yi Chanchan came up to him and hugged him from behind. Shinjuya's heart softened. He put his big hand on her soft hand and asked softly, "What did you dream of just now?" "I dreamed that you took our child to jump off a building." Yi Chanchan pouted and looked aggrieved. "I called you from below and kept telling you not to, but you still walked forward and threw the child down." Shinjuya laughed and turned to look at Yi Chanchan's pitiful look. He reached out and flicked her forehead. Yi Chanchan immediately covered her head. Her eyes were watery and she pouted. When Shinjuya saw this, he suddenly felt that he had done something wrong. "Does it hurt a lot?" Sob, sob, sob. Yi Chanchan opened her arms and hugged him. "Why did you throw the child down?" Shinjuya was speechless. He couldn't help but laugh as he hugged her. "Hey, I didn't. I told you that it was a dream. Dreams are always the opposite. Look, we don't even have a child now." Yi Chanchan's sadness was suddenly blown away by his words. She clenched her fist and hammered it on his chest. Then she pushed him away. "Go away." Shinjuya wasn't pushed away. He held her hand and lay down. "It's easy to solve the problem of not having a child. Let's have one." Yi Chanchan blushed and glared at him. She looked down at his lower body, which was only wrapped in a bath towel. She knew that he had planned this. She pushed him with her knee. "I don't want to. I want to sleep." "Then you sleep. I'll be gentle." Resistance was futile. Yi Chanchan was still firmly suppressed. Other than biting the landlord who bullied her, she couldn't control herself. When it was over, Yi Chanchan was so sleepy that she couldn't open her eyes. Shinjuya kissed the corner of her lips and said, "Let's move to a bigger place." Yi Chanchan opened her eyes and asked, "Why?" "Just now, when you were showering, I thought I saw someone smoking nearby. But when I looked closely, there was no one. I feel strange. It's not safe here. Are you seeing things?" Yi Chanshan suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. Did you see it from the balcony? Yes. There's a winding highway in front of our building, and there aren't many houses around. How could we see someone smoking? When Yi Chanshan asked the question, the hair on her body suddenly stood on end. Really? I'm probably seeing things, but I don't feel very comfortable. Shinjilya leaned over her and gently rubbed her face. Let's change. We can also sell this place and get a bigger one. Yeah. Yi Chanshan looked up at him and said, You gave me this apartment. I have to ask you first before I can sell it. It's okay. If you agree to change, I'll go and see which neighborhoods are better. This one is fine. Okay, then go and take a look. Don't buy something too expensive. A safer neighborhood will do. Yi Chanshan touched his face. But I don't have much money. My bank account. Chapter 1849. Yi Chanshan blinked and shrank her head. No, it's not like I don't want to live here. I can't put all the burden on you. It's very expensive to buy a house in Kingstown. Shinjilya chuckled. I can still afford the down payment. Don't worry. How big are you going to buy? Bigger than this. This is only a little over 70 square meters. About 150 square meters. Oh, won't it be too big for the two of us? Most importantly, it's expensive. No, we'll have children in the future. I don't think it's enough. Yi Chanshan looked up and asked, Oh, aren't you going back to the capital? You can go back to the capital if you want. If you want to settle down in the capital, you can leave the house here or sell it. Okay. Yi Chanshan was touched beyond words. She hugged Shinjilya tighter and nestled in his arms. Why are you so good to me? Yi Chanshan had never experienced all kinds of accommodations and pampering before. Shinjilya gave her all the feelings she imagined a relationship should have, and he also gave her all the qualities a husband should have. He had an outstanding family background, an admirable career, and an appearance that was hard to ignore. If it had been the Yi Chanshan of the past, she would never have imagined that her man would be like this. It was so perfect that it was unrealistic. Shinjilya's lips curled into a smile and he said proudly, Because I'm going to abduct you. If I don't treat you well, what if you get abducted by someone else? Yi Chanshan laughed and buried herself deeper. Sleep. I'm so sleepy. Okay. Shinjilya held her hand tightly and closed his eyes. When the alarm clock rang, the sky was already bright. Yi Chanshan's body was a little sore. When she opened her eyes, Shinjilya was sleeping soundly with her in his arms. All of a sudden, he raised his hand and slapped the alarm clock down. Yi Chanshan got up and pushed him away. She yawned and got up to get dressed. Shinjilya opened his eyes and saw her snow-white back. The hickeys on it were particularly eye-catching. But soon after Yi Chanshan put on her clothes, he couldn't see them anymore. Wake up. It's Monday. Don't you have to go to work? Yi Chanshan pulled the blanket over his head. Shinjilya stretched his back and tossed the blanket aside. He sat up and pounced on her. Yi Chanshan couldn't react in time. She let out a cry of surprise when he pounced on her. Shinjilya planted a kiss on her cheek and said, I'm not going to work. What do you want to eat? I'll make it for you. Yi Chanshan pushed him away and said coquettishly, You scared me to death. What are you doing? I'll just buy some at the subway station when I go to work. That won't do. I don't think those are fresh. Wait a moment. I'll see what I can make for you, Shinjilya said as he stood up. Yi Chanshan threw a pillow at him in disdain. Get dressed. Ah. Shinjilya rummaged through the fridge but found nothing but instant noodles and milk. In the end, he went downstairs and bought some bread. After processing it, he poured a glass of milk and turned it into a delicious breakfast. By the time Yi Chanshan finished washing up, Shinjilya had already made breakfast and was waiting for her. Just as he took a bite of the bread, Shinjilya received a call. Jilya, where are you? I'm in Kingstown. Chapter 1850. Shinjilya was holding the phone normally, but Yi Chanshan could clearly hear the voice coming from the other end. Yi Chanshan picked up the bread and took a bite without saying a word. Shinjilya glanced at Yi Chanshan, then stood up and walked to the balcony. Yi Chanshan looked at him and felt a little guilty. Wasn't she being too selfish? She knew that Shinjilya's grandmother didn't like her, but she still wanted to be with Shinjilya. But Shinjilya's parents seemed to have a good impression of her. Yi Chanshan felt a little conflicted. When she saw Shinjilya's helpless and angry expression, she took a sip of milk and stood up. Shinjilya looked over and looked at Yi Chanshan with a puzzled expression. Yi Chanshan didn't walk toward him. Instead, she picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. I'm going to work. You haven't finished your breakfast yet? Yeah. Yi Qianshan walked over and drank the milk in one gulp. She picked up the bread and ate it as she walked. Shinjiliya wanted to say something, but the phone call seemed to have become a storm. When Yi Qianshan walked out of the corridor, her heart was empty. She finished the bread quickly and pressed the button for the elevator. No hurry. No hurry. Who knew what it would be like after 2 years? Perhaps, as Shinjilia's grandmother had said, she would die at the age of 28. Or perhaps, as the blind uncle had said, she had been harmed by a villain. Or perhaps, neither of them had been accurate, and because she had revealed the secret of heaven, God had changed her fate and given her and Shinjilia a happy life. Ding. The elevator arrived at the station. There was someone inside, but Yi Qianshan didn't notice. She walked in absent-mindedly. Her mind was clouded and she stood inside the elevator. The elevator remained silent. The person behind her suddenly said, "You haven't pressed the button for the elevator yet." It sounded like a man in his 30s. Yi Qianshan was startled by his sudden words. She instinctively looked back and saw a man dressed in black and wearing a black cap. He was very tall and his face was mostly covered by the cap. Yi Qianshan could only see the purple pimples on half of his face. She only glanced at it for a moment before she snapped back to her senses. She turned her head and pressed the button for the first floor. After he pressed it, he suddenly remembered. She did forget to press the elevator button, but the man inside had obviously been standing there for a long time. He also knew to remind her that she hadn't pressed the button, but why didn't he come up and press the button himself? Yi Qianshan found the man a little strange and subconsciously turned her head to look at him. The man seemed to notice that Yi Qianshan was looking at him. He reached out to press down on the brim of his hat. As if he was deliberately lowering his voice, he asked, "What are you looking at? How fierce." Yi Qianshan turned her head away and stopped looking at him. Ding. The elevator arrived. When the door opened, Yi Qianshan walked out. But before she could take a step forward, the man behind her immediately stepped forward. Yi Qianshan was caught off guard and bumped into him. By the time she came back to her senses, the man had already walked a few steps away. There was a small white bag on the ground. Yi Qianshan glanced at it and shouted, "Hey, you dropped something." Chapter 1851. As he shouted, he strode forward and reached out to snatch it. Yi Qianshan's hand was knocked away, and she felt a burning pain. When she looked up, the man reached out and pushed her away at the same time. His hand quickly reached forward. Yi Qianshan clearly saw a cold glint flash past her eyes. Yi Qianshan screamed and fell backward. The cold light passed through the place where she had just been standing and missed. The man's face, which was only half exposed, was a little ferocious. He clutched the small white thing in his hand tightly and walked toward Yi Qianshan without a word. Yi Qianshan's face turned pale and she screamed, "Ah! Help!" She retreated backward in panic and clumsiness. "Who's there?" A loud shout came from outside. The man in black immediately turned around and saw the security guard behind him. He gritted his teeth and glared at Yi Qianshan. Then he ran to the emergency exit and disappeared without a trace. When the security guard saw Yi Qianshan, he immediately ran up and asked, "Miss, are you okay?" Yi Qianshan felt relieved. Her heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was about to jump out. She looked up at the security guard's face and suddenly realized that her body was trembling. She collapsed to the ground. Yi Qianshan immediately opened her bag. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and dialed Shinjilia's number. Shinjilia's line was busy. "Hello, please don't hang up. The number you have dialed is busy." Before the mechanical female voice could finish speaking, the call was picked up. "Hello." It was Shinjilia's voice. Yi Qianshan's heart trembled violently. She pouted and tears fell down her face. She shouted, "Old Shin, I was almost killed." When Shinjilia picked up Yi Qianshan, she was sitting in the security booth with red eyes. When she saw Shinjilia coming over, Yi Qianshan stood up and threw herself at him. She sniffled and said, "Let's move." It was so scary. I thought I was going to die. Yi Qianshan's body was trembling, and Shinjilia's heart was also trembling. He hugged her and whispered, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. Don't go to work today. Let's go home first." "Okay." Yi Qianshan nodded. She felt like her whole body was about to melt. Yi Qianshan was still a little traumatized when she went upstairs. Shinjilia called Yi Qianshan to apply for a leave of absence and explain the situation to her. He then started packing his luggage and said, "Let's stay in a hotel for a few days. We'll move in when I find an apartment." Yi Qianshan hugged him and looked up at him. She said, "Why don't I ask my sister or Lily if there are any vacant houses available? Why don't we buy their second-hand houses?" "Sure, you decide. I still have to renovate, decorate, and wait for the new house. I don't think I can stay here anymore. Old Shin, do you think that person will come back for me?" "Don't think too much, it won't happen." "But Grandma and Uncle Blind told me to be careful of villains. Could this drug addict be a villain? I feel so scared." "It's okay. Don't think too much." Shinjilia tapped her on the forehead. "Your brain is so active, and your imagination is so rich. How could you be willing to be a comics reviewer? You should draw a comic yourself." Chapter 1852. Shinjilia found it a little funny, but he also felt a little defeated. He wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. "Why can't I even change the subject? Be good. Don't be afraid. It'll be fine." Yi Qianshan still found it a little strange. She looked up and asked, "What if he comes back to look for me?" "He won't. He won't be able to find you. We'll stay outside for a few days. When we find a place to live, we'll come back and move." "Okay." Yi Qianshan still felt a little scared. After thinking about it, she went to look for the remote surveillance camera she had bought in the past. She had bought it for fun, but Yi Qianshan had never used it. It was two small cameras with powerful night vision capabilities. Although it wasn't particularly expensive and the quality wasn't very high, it was enough to ensure her safety. Yi Qianshan plugged in the two devices and placed one of them on the shoe cabinet in the entryway. The shoe cabinet was very high and there were ornaments on it. She placed the small camera behind the ornaments, and the angle of view just happened to cover the entire living room. Surveillance camera? Shinjilia looked at the gadgets that Yi Qianshan was fiddling with. He chuckled and asked, "Is this kind of surveillance useful?" "It doesn't matter if it's useful or not. Anyway, it's just sitting there. I'll just use it. I don't feel very comfortable." Yi Qianshan looked at Shinjilia with a little grievance. What had just happened had really scared her. Yi Qianshan had lived for 26 years, and she had never encountered such a thing. In the past, she had always felt that such things were very far away from her. But when she really encountered it, Yi Qianshan suddenly realized that in fact, death was actually around her. If he was unlucky, he might be ambushed while walking on the street or going down the stairs and lose his life. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that the world was extremely scary. Yi Qianshan installed another small camera in the room. After looking for a long time for an angle, she finally decided to place it at the top of the wardrobe. She connected it to the internet. The phone screen already displayed all the movements in the entire room. Shinjilia watched her toss and turn and let her do as she pleased. He was glad that she was fine. Yi Qianshan packed a few changes of clothes and took the computer with her. After confirming that all the valuables were there, Yi Qianshan walked out. After packing up, Yi Qianshan gave Yi Yuyu a call. Yi Yuyu answered the call very quickly. When she saw that it was Yi Qianshan, she was pleasantly surprised. "Sis. Yuyu, where are you?" "I'm at home, do you want to come over? It just so happens that I made some small cakes. Come over and have a taste." After she said that, she suddenly remembered that it was Monday. "Are you going to work today?" "I asked for leave." Sob, "You, I was scared to death just now." Yi Qianshan began to complain, but she quickly shut her mouth and said, "I'll go to your place. Wait for me." "Yeah, come on." Yi Yu looked at the time. It was past 9 am. Shinjilia's car had been in the garage for a long time. It hadn't been driven for more than half a month, so it was covered in a layer of dust. She said, "I thought you drove it away. What a waste of you. Let's take it to the car wash." "Okay, get in the car first." Shinjilia opened the door for her. The moment Yi Qianshan got into the car, Shinjilia felt as if someone was staring at him. The feeling was fleeting, but after looking around, he didn't notice anything amiss. Chapter 1853. Shinjilia narrowed his eyes and secretly raised his guard. He had always been sensitive, so this feeling shouldn't have come from nowhere. "What's wrong?" Yi Qianshan noticed that Shinjilia hadn't moved for a long time. She reached out and tugged at his hand. Shinjilia shook his head gently. "I'm fine. Sit tight." Yi Qianshan fastened her seatbelt, took the car door and sat down. Shinjilia looked left and right again before finally getting into the car. He fastened his seatbelt and started the engine. When Yi Qianshan saw him looking around warily, she felt a little creeped out. Shinjilia was never like that. His behavior today was very unusual. "Old Shen, what did you see?" Yi Qianshan asked. She suddenly felt a shiver run down her spine. He turned his head abruptly. Behind him was a beautiful luxury car with a pitch-black interior. There didn't seem to be anything strange. On the other hand, Shinjilya was shocked by Yi Chanshan's reaction. What's wrong? Shinjilya's expression was one of shock. Yi Chanshan's heart was about to jump out of her chest. I feel like I'm going crazy. What should I do? I've been so paranoid. Don't be afraid. Relax. Shinjilya said as he drove the car out of the underground parking lot. His voice was soft and steady, as if it contained an unknown magic that hypnotized and soothed her. Shinjilya didn't focus all his attention on that. Instead, he kept an eye on his surroundings and the rearview mirror. Shinjilya exited the bustling district and got on the highway. When Yi Chanshan heard him speak, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. She said, "You're opening it the wrong way around." "Yes, I know." Shinjilya kept glancing at the rearview mirror as he drove. Let the car get used to the feeling of being on the road. It's not a bad idea to take a detour. This was the first time Yi Chanshan had heard of such a thing. She looked at Shinjilya and realized that he was a little distracted. "What are you doing?" "Shoo, sit quietly." Shinjilya drove steadily. When he suddenly sped up, Yi Chanshan's heart skipped a beat. She sat there without a word. However, when he looked at the rearview mirrors on the left and right as well as the mirror in the middle, there didn't seem to be anything strange. However, Shinjilya's reaction made everyone nervous. Yi Chanshan asked hesitantly, "Is someone following us?" Shinjilya didn't reply. He just increased the speed of the car. Yi Chanshan looked back. It was not until all the cars behind them had disappeared that Shinjilya slowed down. Was someone following us just now? Yi Chanshan was already sweating profusely. She looked at Shinjilya with fear and worry in her eyes. Shinjilya shook his head. "No, it was just a false alarm." "Is that so?" "Well, I just wanted to give it a try just in case. If it's really the person from this morning, then if he follows us to Yuyu's house, Yuyu and third brotherly will probably be in danger. But fortunately, I was overthinking it. Why are you being so paranoid all of a sudden?" Yi Chanshan had a nagging feeling that things weren't that simple. Shinjilya wasn't like her. Shinjilya must have seen or sensed something that made him so wary. "What do you mean by fine?" "I was obviously infected by you." Shinjilya chuckled. He held onto the steering wheel and said helplessly, "Turn on the GPS. I'm lost." Chapter 1854. By the time they reached Yuyu's house, it had already been 2 hours since they had left. Looking at the time, it was almost 12 o'clock. This was one of the famous villas in Kingstown. The people who lived here were either rich or powerful. All the cars coming and going were luxury cars. Shinjilya's flashy Porsche looked very mediocre in comparison. Shinjilya and Yi Chanshan searched through their memories, but they couldn't find Li Jinan's house. In the end, they gave Yuyu a call. Yuyu was in the middle of cooking. When she received Yi Chanshan's call, she laughed out loud. "Where are you right now?" We're at number 3. I live in room 8. It has a black iron gate and there's a pot of red roses at the door. Go south and you'll see it when you head east." Yi Chanshan was silent for a moment before she yelled, "Can you tell me which direction is up, down, left, and right? Who can understand north, south, east, and west?" Yuyu laughed out loud. "Isn't Shinjilya coming with you? Get him to take you. I'm cooking now. I'm hanging up." When Yi Chanshan heard the busy tone, she gritted her teeth. Shinjilya glanced at her and asked, "Where?" "South then east." Shinjilya immediately stepped on the accelerator and made a U-turn. Yi Chanshan widened her eyes and asked, "You know where it is?" "Not everyone is like you who can't tell the difference between north, south, east, and west." Shinjilya was a little smug. "You haven't been a living map for so many years for nothing." "Bah. I have a GPS when I go out, I just don't know the house number." She put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest as she said, "If you have the guts, dial the house number and use the navigation now. I guarantee that we'll be there in no time." All right. I got it." Shinjilya couldn't help but laugh. "There are biscuits in the back of the car. Take them out and give them to Yuyu." When did you buy the cookies?" Shinjilya was a little embarrassed. He rubbed his nose and said, "It's been a long time. My colleague gave me this last time. I can't go to Yuyu's house empty-handed, so I took it as a gift." She's my sister. Why are you being so polite?" Although he said that, he still turned around and took out the biscuit. It was quite an expensive brand, and the packaging looked quite high-end. "But how long have you put it there? Can it still be eaten?" "Sure. This kind of thing has a shelf life of at least half a year, right? It's edible." In fact, Shinjilia wasn't sure either. In the end, he flipped through the expiration date. After confirming that there were no problems with it, he finally felt at ease. We're here. Yi Qianshan saw a particularly luxuriant cluster of red roses. They climbed up the railing and sprouted a bud. Behind the black iron railings was a beautifully landscaped courtyard. One could tell at a glance that it was huge. It wasn't Yi Qianshan's first time here, but she was still amazed by the sight. With envy in her eyes, Yi Qianshan unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car with the biscuits. The expression on Yi Qianshan's face wasn't obvious, but Shinjilia saw it clearly. Without making a sound, he parked the car before getting out and pressing the doorbell. The door opened automatically. Yi Qianshan and Shinjilia walked in and saw the luxurious yet minimalistic interior decoration. Yi Yuyu had just finished preparing the last dish. When she saw them enter, she said, "You're here. We're just about to eat. Sis, can you give me a hand?" Chapter 1855. It's been so long since you've come to see me. How dare you say that? Yi Yuyu's belly was propped up. She looked great. Her skin was rosy and smooth. Yi Qianshan had seen a few pregnant women before, but none of them looked like Yi Yuyu. One look was enough to tell that she was living a good life. Yi Yuyu's steps were light as she carried the dishes out. If it weren't for her belly, it would be hard to tell that she was pregnant. "Tisk, is your man back for dinner?" "Of course he is," Yi Yuyu replied briskly. She looked at the clock hanging in the middle of the living room and said, "It's almost time." She turned to the kitchen and took out the dishes that she had just prepared. Yi Qianshan washed her hands and helped to get the bowls and chopsticks. She had just scooped the rice when Yi Yu suddenly said, 3, 2, 1. Ding dong. The doorbell rang just in time. Yi Yu immediately rushed to the door. Yi Qianshan was shocked when she saw that and said, "No way. How did she hear him coming back from so far away?" Or was Yi Yu just used to Li Jinan's return at this time? The door opened. Yi Yu was like a lively bird as she flew into Li Jinan's arms. Li Jinan caught her in his arms. His eyes were filled with tenderness. "You're back." "Yeah," Li Jinan replied without much emotion. He then noticed that there were guests inside. Yi Yu pulled Li Jinan along and said, "My sister is here and so is Shinjilia." She lowered her voice and whispered, "He might even be my brother-in-law in the future." When Shinjilia saw Yi Yu's expression, the smile on his face was pure and unpretentious. He looked truly happy. Yi Yu had stayed with the Shin family for a period of time. Shinjilia had seen her almost every day. At that time, Yi Yu had only been deliberately trying to please him. The only other thing she had shown was her obvious depression. Thank goodness. Thank goodness that she had divorced Shin Luo. Otherwise, Yi Yu would never have been happy in this life. Li Jinan laughed as he was pulled up by Yi Yu. His eyes were fixed on Yi Yu's feet. He didn't forget to remind her, "Be careful. The floor is slippery." "I won't. I walk around every day. It's fine." She tugged at Li Jinan and said to Shinjilia and Yi Qianshan, "We'll go wash our hands first. Sit down. It's time to eat." Yi Qianshan had never been one to be pretentious. She immediately sat down and poured herself and Shinjilia a bowl of rice. "You're living such a good life. Every day you come up with new ways to cook for your husband. You wait for your husband to go to work while you wait at home to give birth," Yi Qianshan said with a hint of envy in her voice. Of course Shinjilia could tell. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "You can do the same in the future." "Of course, I want to be like this in the future, but we'll talk about it when I have children. If I don't have children and don't work, then I'll be too lazy." Yi Qianshan looked at Shinjilia with yearning in her eyes. "Can you afford to support me in the future?" "That goes without saying." Shinjilia extended his hand and tapped Yi Qianshan's forehead. He said, "Even if you asked me to raise 8 or 10 more children, I'd be able to afford it." "Bah. 8 or 10 children. Who do you want to have them with?" "With you, of course. Who else can I have them with?" Chapter 1856. Nonsense. Uncle Blind Man also said that it's just a possibility. Might not happen. Why are you so concerned about it? The smile on Yi Qianshan's face disappeared completely. She sighed softly. Yi Yu and Li Jinan walked over quickly. When she saw Yi Qianshan's unhappy expression, Yi Yu walked over curiously and asked, "What's wrong?" "Sup? Yu, what do you think I'll do if I can't have children in the future?" Yi Qianshan looked at Yi Yu with hurt written all over her face. Yi Yu laughed and sat down on the chair that Li Jinan had brought out for her. She replied, "How is that possible? Why can't you have children out of nowhere? As she spoke, Yi Yuyu's face was full of ambiguity. She looked at Yi Qianshan and then at Xinjilia and asked, "Are the two of you preparing to have children? Didn't they just get back together not too long ago?" Yi Yuyu was a little surprised. She hadn't expected that after getting back together, not only would they be talking about marriage, but they would also be preparing to get pregnant. Yi Qianshan pouted her lips. She felt defeated and replied, "That's not it. I've just encountered a few things that haven't been going my way lately." He told Yi Yuyu in detail about her visit to Xinjilia's parents in the capital, as well as what Xinjilia's grandmother and the blind uncle had said. Yi Qianshan's bitter expression, coupled with the aggrieved expression on her face, made her look extremely pitiful. "You, I'm so envious of you now. You have such a happy family and your belly is so big. What if I really can't have children in the future just like they said?" "That won't happen. That old lady is a fraud." Yi Yuyu was a little annoyed. "She's spouting nonsense. She even said that I'd get into big trouble when I turn 25. I'm 26 now. What big trouble can I get into?" Yi Qianshan's eyes widened when she heard that. "That can't be. When did she say that?" 2 years ago, Xinjilia replied. "But you're really in big trouble now. Have you forgotten?" Yi Qianshan covered her mouth in disbelief. "That Guan guy and Shenluo, and are in jail. Have you forgotten?" "That's right. Of course not. That was when I was 26 years old. She said I was 25 years old." "You hung a steel wire and fell from it." She couldn't help but link the incident with Yi Yuyu. "Didn't you stay in the hospital for many days at that time? Wasn't that a big deal?" Yi Qianshan was a little paranoid. Yi Yuyu was at a loss for words. All right. If that's the case, aren't I perfectly fine right now?" "That's different." Yi Qianshan panicked. "They're saying that I won't be able to have children in the future. It's over. It's over. What should I do?" "That won't happen. You've been the only one thinking about it." Xinjilia held her hand. He felt helpless and defeated. "They're just saying it's a possibility. Trust me. I'll tell you about it when we get home tonight. You'll know. I should give her a simple treatment tonight. Otherwise, Yi Qianshan's mental health will deteriorate sooner or later." Xinjilia was filled with regret. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have been in such a hurry and brought you home." In the end, Yi Qianshan knew that she might have gone overboard. She quickly pressed his hand down and said, all right. I'll stop talking. Let's eat." Chapter 1857. When Yi Qianshan heard Xinjilia's words, she didn't say a word. She only looked up at Yi Yuyu. Yi Yuyu shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. You're too scared to think that it might be true. If you think about it from a different perspective, things will be much better." "Think about it from a different perspective?" "That's right." Yi Yuyu looked at Yi Qianshan and took a sip of the soup. "Perhaps it's just an excuse that the old madam of the Shen family wants to object to you being together with Jilia. Perhaps it's just a lie that she came up with to make you back off? But the blind uncle in our town said it too." "Who's the blind uncle?" "He's a blind man in Yun Town who's possessed by a deity. He's more than 10 years older than Dad, but he looks older. You've probably met him before." "I see." Yi Yuyu nodded her head. She was silent for a moment before saying, "Perhaps the old lady knew that you were going to look for the blind uncle and colluded with him?" "How is that possible?" Yi Qianshan found it absurd. "Why is it impossible? Didn't you say that the blind uncle was possessed by a deity?" "The old lady claimed to be half a deity. Perhaps they have a mysterious channel in a world that we can't see that allows them to communicate with each other. Then they colluded with each other to deceive you." Yi Yuyu's words sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Li Jinan felt a little uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and picked up a piece of food for her. "Eat your food. Don't be superstitious." "That's right." Xinjilia also picked up a piece of cake for Yi Qianshan. With a serious expression he said, "This is the era of science. Don't believe in such nonsense. Even if it's true, it doesn't matter. Medical science is so advanced now." Yi Yuyu nodded her head vehemently. When Li Jinan saw that, he chimed in and said, "At most we can have a test tube baby. The child will still be our own." When Yi Qianshan heard that, her lips twitched. Yi Yuyu nudged Li Jinan and glared at him. She then looked at Yi Qianshan and said, "Don't listen to my husband. Don't let your imagination run wild. If God is useful, what's the point of science?" "Yeah, Yuyu is right. Let's eat. Let's not talk about this anymore." Xinjilia picked up the bowl and stuffed it into Yi Qianshan's hand. Only then did Yi Qianshan stop talking and bury her head in her food. Yi Yu sipped her soup and looked at Li Jinan. She asked, I heard that our company is preparing to adapt a novel into a television series. What's it called? 99 Days of Hidden Marriage, Li Jinan said. It's about a female gangster who was framed and had her tongue cut off. She became mute. Later she married her Prince Charming. 3 years later she got pregnant and was kidnapped. She died. Then she was reborn. It can't be. Isn't her husband going to save her? No, I'm going on a date with the white moonlight in my heart. No way, isn't she pregnant with his child? Apparently the child isn't his. It's his younger brother's, so, D*MN. That man is such a jerk. Yi Chanshan's face was filled with anger. When is the television series airing? I'm going to go and scold him. Li Jinan smiled. It hasn't started filming yet. Just wait. If such a man existed in real life, his corpse would probably be whipped, Shinjilya interjected. One Lily, ha ha ha. Chapter 1858. Yi Chanshan and Yi Yu both looked over. Shinjilya felt a little creeped out by their stares. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Shinjilya felt a little uncomfortable. It's not just being whipped. You should be cut into pieces and minced into minced meat. Yi Chanshan gritted her teeth. You mustn't be that kind of man in the future. You won't have a good ending if you abandon someone after you've used them. Shinjilya could even sense Yi Chanshan's murderous aura. He nodded his head repeatedly and said, Got it, got it. Yi Yu laughed and asked, Why did you suddenly come looking for me today? Isn't it Monday today? Don't you have to work? Usually at this time Yi Chanshan would be busy with work. Where would she find the time to hang out with him? At the mention of that, Yi Chanshan felt even more aggrieved. She looked like she was about to burst into tears as she said, Why have I been so unlucky lately? Things like this always happen, boo-hoo, let me tell you. He recounted everything that had happened this morning in detail. She said, That can't be. That's too dangerous. I think it's best that you don't go back for the next few days. Why don't you come stay with me for a few days? We still have a few empty rooms here. Feel free to stay. Yi Yu's heart skipped a beat. Yi Chanshan shook her head pitifully and replied, We're planning to stay in a hotel. Why are you staying in a hotel? Just stay at my place. And is that okay? Yi Yu looked at Li Jinan. Li Jinan nodded his head. I'm fine with that. Sister-in-law can accompany my wife at the same time. With 2 women around it won't be too boring. Shinjilya didn't think it was appropriate and said, Forget it. We have to work during the day. It's not good for a pregnant woman to have a good rest. Chanshan, let's just stay in a hotel. Well, let's stay in the hotel. But Yu brother-in-law, I want to ask, do you have any unused houses in your hands? The kind of second-hand houses that you want to sell to us? Li Jinan's house was definitely very safe. Moreover, since it was a second-hand house owned by one of their own, the facilities inside must be trustworthy, saving them trouble. Yi Chanshan looked at him expectantly, her eyes sparkling. Yi Yu thought for a moment and looked at Li Jinan. She asked, Didn't you mention that your brother's house in Jiangzhou was going to be sold? Yi Chanshan almost spat out her saliva. Jiangzhou? Jiangzhou was a famous luxury villa district in Kingstown. Yi Chanshan would never be able to afford a house like that. I say, Yu, you think too highly of me. The villas in Jiangzhou are not something that ordinary people like us can afford. When Shinjilya heard that, he looked up and asked, Is it expensive? What do you mean by expensive? That was quite expensive. It should be at least in tens of millions, right? Yi Chanshan drank a glass of fruit juice to calm her nerves. Li Jinan rubbed his nose and replied, My brother does want to sell it, but the villa was renovated badly. It's not suitable for you to stay in. I do have a smaller commercial apartment here. It's about 130 square feet. It's in Dragon City. Dragon City? That place was also a high-end residence, but the price should be acceptable. Chapter 1859. Shinjilya didn't answer Yi Chanshan. Instead, he looked at Li Jinan and asked, Can you make a move? Li Jinan nodded slightly. Sure. I took it from my second brother. I don't have the title deed with me. If you want it, I'll get it from my brother. That works? Yi Chanshan was speechless. Have you lived there before? I lived there for a while, but I moved to the company, so I don't live there anymore. I see. Yi Chanshan nodded her head and looked at Shinjilya. Shall we go take a look later? Sure. After dinner, Yi Chanshan helped Yi Yu clean up and wash the dishes. The 2 men, Shinjilya and Li Jinan, sat opposite each other on the sofa and chatted happily. After cleaning up, Yi Qianqian and Yi Yuyu walked in the direction of the sofa in the living room. At a glance, they saw the smiles on the faces of the two men. Are you done? Shenjulia looked at Yi Qianqian, stood up and said, let's go. Brother-in-law said he'd take us to have a look. So fast? Well, you guys are moving anyway. The apartment hasn't been empty for long, so it should be very clean inside. I don't have anything to do in the afternoon. Let's go together. Li Jinan picked up the car key. Honey, do you want to go together? Since you're all going, I'll go with you. She hadn't gone out in a long time, so she was a little excited. I'm going to change. The corners of Li Jinan's mouth turned up. He turned to look at Yi Qianqian and Shenjulia and said, I'll go help her. You guys take a seat first. Alright, go ahead. When Li Jinan's silhouette disappeared down the stairs, Yi Qianqian nudged Shenjulia and asked, what were you talking about just now? No, we were just chatting casually. What did you talk about? I've always felt that my brother-in-law is quite aloof. How can you chat with him so happily? What the hell? Shenjulia couldn't help but laugh. Of course you're cold to girls, but we men are different. We have common topics to talk about. What? A car? Beautiful women? Yi Qianqian glanced at him in disdain. That's all men get when they get together. Yeah, beautiful, we're talking about wives. He's talking about his wife, I'm talking about mine. Bah, who's your wife? Yi Qianqian stood up. We're not married yet. Shenjulia held her in his arms. It's only a matter of time. Yi Qianqian smiled and looked at him. The atmosphere was harmonious and peaceful. Upstairs, Yi Yuyu had found some clothes. When she saw Li Jinan come up, she took one look and asked, Nan, do I look good in this? Nice. You haven't seen it yet. Yi Yuyu pouted. Li Jinan walked up and looked at the dress. He gestured and said, you look good in anything. Since we're going out, let's go to second uncle's house on the way. I really miss those children. Sure, Li Jinan agreed without hesitation. He started to help Yi Yuyu change into her clothes. When they came down, Yi Qianqian and Shenjulia were sitting on the sofa, looking at their phones. When they saw them coming down, they stood up together. Shenjulia replied, I told you not to be so paranoid. Isn't everything fine now? When Yi Yuyu heard that, she asked curiously, what are you doing? Didn't I almost get into an accident this morning? I installed a surveillance camera at home. I just turned it on to take a look. Yi Yuyu felt her hair stand on end. Are you afraid that that person will find his way to your house? It's better to be safe than sorry. Don't scare yourself. He's not that resourceful. Shenjulia had no choice but to tap her forehead. Let's go. Dash. Chapter 1860. Li Jinan drove his own car, so he naturally followed Yi Yuyu. The four of them in the two cars followed Li Jinan around. After a round of discussion, they decided on a destination. Yi Yuyu wanted to go to Li Siqing's house to see the children, so Yi Qianqian and Shenjulia suggested that they go to the hotel to rest. They parted ways. Yi Yuyu hadn't visited the children in a long time. After buying some toys for them, she went to Yuxiu. At that time, the children had returned from school. They sat in the living room chatting and doing their homework. Li Mosen was like a little adult. He watched Li Jianhua do her homework, occasionally giving her pointers and frowning. When Yi Yuyu arrived, Li Jianhua was pleasantly surprised. She put down her pencil and called out, Auntie? Her small body was obviously much thinner than before. In the past she had been a chubby little girl. Now she had less meat on her body, but she had grown taller. Li Jinan felt a sense of danger. He stood in front of his wife and used one hand to block Li Jianhua. He said, be careful. Your little cousin is in your auntie's stomach. I know. Li Jianhua's face was round and her skin was pink and tender. Her eyes were like black agate, crystal clear and bright. She looked at Yi Yuyu's belly and said, there's a little sister in my mother's belly too. Li Jinan raised his eyebrows slightly and chuckled. He picked Li Jianhua up and asked, how do you know it's a little sister? My daddy said it. Daddy said that the thing in mommy's stomach must be a little sister. Li Jianhua tilted her head and kept looking at Yi Yuyu's stomach. I think Auntie is also having a little sister in her stomach. Why? Yi Yuyu adored the little girl. She was pretty, lively, and quick-witted. Granny Rong said that a round stomach will give birth to a little sister, and a pointy stomach will give birth to a little brother, but I've never seen a pointy stomach before. So, Auntie must be having a little sister in your stomach too. Yi Yuyu couldn't help but laugh. She walked over and touched Li Jianhua's little face. She said, you're so mischievous. Come down. I bought you a toy. Li Jianyue was a little surprised, but before she could get excited, she turned her head to take a look. She looked left and right. When she realized that no one was coming out, she wiggled her body excitedly and got down from Li Jinan's body. When Li Jinan saw that, he knew what the little guy was up to. He reached out and knocked on her little head. You haven't finished your homework, have you? Li Jianyue covered her head and pouted. She looked a little unhappy and said, Who said that? I'm done. It's just that there are a lot of mistakes. Li Mosen walked over with a small notebook and said, Uncle, take a look at Ursu's homework. Li Jinan rarely had time to visit the little guys, but he knew that Li Mosen had skipped a grade and was in the 3rd grade, and his academic performance was particularly good. As for Li Jianyue, she could only stay in the 1st year. When he took Li Jianyue's notebook, he didn't have much hope in his heart. However, when he opened the first page of the notebook, he was still shocked by Li Jianyue's ugly handwriting. The corner of his mouth twitched as he asked, What kind of homework is this? A dictation. Li Jianyue said loudly. I feel that my handwriting is all correct. I even looked it up in the dictionary. Chapter 1861. Li Jinan laughed out loud and read it aloud. Who taught you that? When Li Jianyue heard that, she was not convinced. She put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest. Isn't that so, Auntie? I wrote Wolf gets raped. Is that wrong? Yu was arranging the toys for the little girl. When she heard that, she didn't even look up and replied, There's nothing wrong with being in cahoots. Isn't that an idiom? That's right. Li Jianyue walked over angrily and said, Little uncle is a bad guy. Brother Mosen is laughing at me. You're laughing at me too. Li Jinan couldn't help but laugh. He looked over and said, You're taking your own breasts. Ahaha. Li Jinan couldn't hold it in any longer. Taking your own breasts? Isn't that a little too difficult? What? Yu looked over. What's wrong with that? You didn't write it wrong. Li Jinan squatted down and took the notebook over to read it with his wife. When Yu saw it, she laughed out loud. Li Jianyue's face turned red. She went forward and snatched the notebook from Li Jinan's hand. She turned around and sat down on the sofa angrily. What's going on? Su Chinxi's gentle voice was heard. Following that was the sound of slow footsteps. When Li Jianyue saw Su Chinxi, she pouted and shouted, Mom, they're all laughing at me. Su Chinxi walked down the stairs with a man following behind her. When Li Xiqing saw Li Jinan, he raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, What's the wind today? Li Jinan stood up and helped Yu up. He said, I have nothing to do today, so I brought my wife here to play. He looked at Su Chenxi's belly and exclaimed, Sister-in-law's belly is growing too big. It's not. Any slower and I'll die. Li Xiqing glanced at Su Chenxi's belly and sighed. Su Chenxi blushed. She elbowed Li Xiqing and said softly, What are you talking about? Li Xiqing blocked her hand and said sternly, What are you thinking? I'm saying that taking care of you and the kids will distract me. Su Chenxi blushed even more, gave him a stare, and then went to sit with her daughter on the sofa. Li Jinan was experienced, so he smiled ambiguously and didn't point it out. Yu was still playing with Li Jianyue's toys. She said, Ursu, little aunt bought you a fantasy series of Lego. Do you want to play with me? She looked at her notebook and said, I haven't finished my homework yet. With that, she looked at Li Xiqing pitifully and said, Daddy? With a smile on his lips, Li Xiqing reached out. Li Jianyue subconsciously put the book in his palm, but before she put it down, she immediately retracted her hand. She pouted and warned, Daddy, don't laugh at me. Li Xiqing didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. He picked up the booklet and said, Go ahead and play with Auntie. Li Jianyue jumped excitedly. She turned around and skipped over to Yuyu's side. She shouted, Little Auntie, I'm here. Seeing his daughter's expression, Li Xiqing smiled slightly and flipped open the exercise book. His smile immediately froze. After a moment of silence, he said, Inviting the wolf into the house, the wolf is besieged and raped. There's no turning back. Li Jinan and Yu burst out laughing at the same time. They couldn't help but laugh out loud. Poison is a guest in the village. Every festive season is missed. Chapter 1862. Li Jianyue pouted and shouted, These are all third-grade questions. I've never learned them before. She knows all the first-grade questions, Li Mosen said. Dad, I think Ursu is a fast learner. That's right. I'm very smart. Li Jianyue didn't know how wrong she was. She echoed, Although. I might have written a few words wrongly. If an old book taught me, I would definitely write them. Mom, don't you think so? Li Jianyue was completely unaware of how wrong she was. Su Qinxi laughed until her shoulders trembled. When she heard that, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Li Jianyue's mouth turned into a hook. Her little face and eyes were red. She said, "Bad guy, you're all laughing at me." Sob sob sob. Su Qinxi quickly stopped smiling and said, "Ursu, these are all third-grade knowledge, right?" "Yeah." Li Jianyue nodded. After sniffing, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Very good. A first grader can write so much. There are not so many children outside who can write so well." Su Qinxi hugged her daughter and said, "Our little princess is the smartest." Su Qinxi went over and hugged her daughter. Li Jianyue blinked and asked pitifully, "Really?" "Of course. Do you know how to put together the Lego that Andy gave you?" Su Qinxi hugged Li Jianyue and slowly walked in the direction of Yi Yuyu. Suddenly her belly was kicked. Su Qinxi was stunned. Her lips curled into a smile as she stroked her belly. Li Xiqing saw it and walked over. He asked softly, "Did this little guy kick you again?" Su Qinxi nodded. "I suddenly kicked her, but she stopped now." She turned her head and looked at Li Xiqing. Then she pulled him and said, "Accompany your daughter to put together the Lego." Li Xiqing had no choice but to walk over to the pile of Lego. He looked at it and said, "Ursu, come here." Li Ursu walked over and looked at her father obediently. "Do you know how to put it together?" "Yes." "Do you know how to read the blueprints?" "Yes." "Do you want Dad to teach you?" "No need." "Okay, then work hard on your own." Li Xiqing rubbed Li Jianyue's little head. Li Jinan was dumbfounded. Is that even possible? Isn't this a little too convenient? In this way, Li Xiqing could spend more time with his wife and work. No wonder his company was getting better and better recently. No wonder it said that daughters are the closest to their parents. It made him want to have a daughter too. He couldn't help but glance at Yi Yuyu's tummy and ask, "Are we having a son or a daughter?" Yi Yuyu looked at him and said heartlessly, "Son." Li Jinan was a little disappointed and replied, "A son is fine too. A daughter would be best." Li Xiqing heard their words and felt even more proud. Looking at his daughter, he said lovingly, "Dad will ask Granny Rong to give you a nutritious meal." Su Qinxi suddenly remembered and said, "I'll call Nanny Rong and tell her to cook more tonight. I want to eat Nanny Rong's sweet and sour fish." Li Jinan didn't stand on ceremony at all. "Add more vinegar. My wife loves it." Su Qinxi laughed and said, "All right, all right, all right." Li Jinan sat on the sofa, glanced at the family portrait hanging in the living room and asked, "Daesu, are you used to living in the capital?" Chapter 1863. Come on, you're actually very proud of yourself. Do you think I don't know? Li Jinan poured himself a glass of water and took a sip. Li Xiqing kept a faint smile on his lips and slowly shook his head. "I'm very happy that Daesu is smart, but it's not a good thing for a 6-year-old child to jump too far in his studies. His friend is still 2 years older than him. I don't have a problem with Chu skipping a grade, but I won't allow it for my child." "Are you really not allowed?" "Yeah." Li Xiqing leaned back on the sofa and slowly said, "First of all, his height is already very different from his classmates. Now that he's in the 4th grade, I've already given him a big jump." Li Jinan almost spat out. "You're too indulgent of him. Can he learn?" "He can." Li Xiqing was telling the truth and said, "I looked at his results. He's at the top of the list." Li Jinan's lips twitched. "Your children are really freakish. Oh, I forgot, there's also a little girl. Yeah, this is what they mean by, there's always a shortcoming." Li Jinan looked at Li Jianyue meaningfully. "This little girl is like a normal child in your family. She's also very smart, but she likes to play and can't settle down to study. If she settles down to study, she'll definitely be much better than other children of her age." Li Jinan took it as him showing off. As he drank the water, he couldn't help but wonder if his future children would also be so freakish. If it's a boy, it's not bad to throw him into the army. If it's a girl, he'll raise her at home and feed her until she's fair and plump and dressed up beautifully. As he thought about it, he couldn't help but smile. He looked at Li Jianyue and asked Li Xiqing, "Your 2 boys are so outstanding. What kind of partner should our little girl find in the future? Not to say how much better he is than Daesu or Mosen, but he can't be too far off, right?" The 2 children, Li Jianxian and Li Mosen, were too outstanding compared to their peers. In comparison, it was difficult for children of the same age to surpass them. Li Xiqing had obviously thought about this problem as well. Feeling a slight headache, he said, "This problem is not something we parents should consider. Let her choose for herself when she grows up." Ah, Li Jianhua seemed to feel that they were talking about her. She turned around and said, "Daddy, I forgot to tell you. Last night I called my brother and he said that they are more relaxed with their studies, so he wants Grandpa and Grandma to bring him home to play for a few days before going back to school." Li Xiqing was pleasantly surprised, but it was gone in a flash. He nodded and said, "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" Li Jianhua stuck out her tongue and said, "I forgot. I only remembered it now." "Okay," Li Xiqing responded quietly, picked up the phone, and dialed the number he had given his son. Li Jianqian was playing soccer. The indoor soccer field was very spacious. There were only him and Yu Chulin. When he heard his phone ring, his eyes lit up. He turned to look at his phone and shouted, "Chu, I'm going to take a call." Yu Chulin was panting from the kick. When he saw Li Jianqian running away, he immediately chased after him and shouted, "Jianqian, you can do that too." Chapter 1864. When Yu Chulin heard this, he panted and ran to where they were resting. He grabbed a bottle of water and started gulping it down. Li Jianqian was obviously looking forward to his father's call. When he saw the word "Dad" on the caller ID, he immediately picked it up and shouted, "Dad!" Li Xiqing, who was far away in Kingstown, felt his heart soften when he heard his son's voice. "Yeah. What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm playing basketball with Chu. We're not done yet." "Are you busy?" "No." Li Jianqian replied immediately. The smile on Li Xiqing's face widened. He didn't care about the look in his brother's eyes and asked, "I heard that you want to go back to Kingstown?" "Yes, I've discussed it with my teacher. I can take a week off." "Dad, can I go back?" "Sure." Li Xiqing's voice was light and he agreed very quickly. Li Jianqian was overjoyed. He hadn't expected Li Xiqing to agree so readily. He exclaimed in surprise, "Dad, really? That's great." "Really? Do you want Dad to pick you up?" "No need." Li Jianqian looked very happy. He sat down and said, "Dad will stay at home with Mom. Grandma and Grandpa will take me back. Then, if I go back, can I bring my friend to Kingstown for a few days?" Li Xiqing was a little surprised and asked, "Is that the guy called Chu that you told me about?" "Yeah." Li Jianqian subconsciously glanced at Yu Chulin beside him and said, "Chu is a good friend of mine. He grew up in the capital and has never been anywhere else. Therefore, I want to bring him to Kingstown to take a look." "I'm fine with it, but will his family agree?" "Yeah. Dad, his parents aren't at home. He's staying at Grandma's. As long as Grandma and Grandpa bring him along, his grandma will agree." When Li Xiqing heard that, he thought for a moment and said, "Sure. Bring them along." "Thank you, Dad." Li Jianqian was very excited and said, "I'll talk to our class teacher tomorrow. I'll go and tell Chu now. Bye, Dad." "Bye." Li Xiqing's lips curled up slightly as he nodded. After a while, Li Jianqian hung up the phone. Looking at the phone in front of him, Li Jianqian stood up and said to Yu Chulin excitedly, "Chu, my father has agreed. Let's apply for leave from our homeroom teacher tomorrow. After that, we can go to Kingstown together." Yu Chulin was also pleasantly surprised. "That's great. I want to meet your brother and sister. Mosin is very smart. I'm sure you'll get along well with him." Li Jianqian rubbed his palms together eagerly. "What about your sister?" Yu Chulin asked. Li Jianqian was silent for a moment before replying, "My sister is very cute. She's good-looking and she can be a little muddle-headed at times. She loves to eat, but compared to other girls of her age, my sister is more sensible." Yu Chulin understood. He smiled and nodded. He picked up the ball and said, "I'm not playing anymore. Let's go home." "All right." Li Xiqing hung up the phone and turned to look at his wife, who was playing with Legos with their daughter. "Your son wants to bring a friend home." Su Qinxi was a bit surprised and asked, "The Chu that our son always talks about?" Chapter 1865. The reason why he left his son in the capital was that he wanted Li Jianqian to warm up the lives of the two elderly people. Secondly, he wanted his son to be independent as soon as possible. Obviously, this method was very effective. Su Qinxi didn't think so. She felt a little uncomfortable and said, "How is that smart? Without parents by his side, what's the use of having a well-developed brain?" His feelings for the child have faded. Faded? Li Xiqing put down his phone and raised his eyebrows with a proud expression. "Why do I feel that our feelings for each other have deepened? When Su Qianxi heard that, she looked at Li Xiqing with envy and said unhappily, "The relationship between you and your son has deepened, but it has distanced us." Li Xiqing laughed. "Our son will be back in a few days. When that time comes, there will be plenty of time for you to nurture your feelings." Su Qianxi was still unhappy. She pouted and lowered her head to continue setting up the fairy tale-themed Lego that Yi Yu had just brought with her. Li Mosen, on the other hand, lowered his head to do his homework seriously. He didn't seem to be distracted by the voices of the adults at all. Yi Yu glanced at Li Mosen and called out, "Mosen, have you finished your homework?" Li Mosen looked up and shook his head gently. "Not yet. Just a little bit more. Have you seen the toys that little auntie brought for you? Do you like them?" Li Mosen hadn't actually looked at them yet. When he heard that, he looked up and smiled. "I like them all." Yi Yu heard that and looked up at him. Her lips curled up slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She felt a little sad in her heart. This child seemed to be somewhat similar to her when she was young. He clearly called Li Xiqing daddy, and Su Qianxi mommy, but from the moment they entered the door until now, Yi Yu saw that the child was reserved. He accompanied Li Jianyue to do her homework and didn't hesitate to put down his own homework. It wasn't until Li Jianyue was with the adults that Li Mosen went to do his own homework. Although Yi Yu didn't want to think too much about it, the child's words and actions as well as the words that he had just said to her, gave Yi Yu a familiar feeling. The helplessness of living under someone else's roof and having no choice but to obey and please others. Yi Yu didn't say a word. She looked down at the young girl in front of her. Li Jianyue's face was pink and tender. Her big eyes were dark and innocent as she stared at the toy in front of her. She was very focused. One look and anyone could tell that she was a girl from a rich family. He had no scruples in his actions. He said whatever he thought and did whatever he thought. He was free and unrestrained. In contrast, Mosen seemed to have placed his position a little too neatly. After more than 10 minutes, Li Mosen finally finished his homework. After handing it to Li Xiqing for inspection, he saw Li Xiqing nodding approvingly, and a happy smile finally appeared on his mixed-race face. After he was done packing his things, he went to open the packaging of the toys that Yi Yu had brought. Boys of this age, in addition to the various figurines of popular anime characters, liked some car models or some heavy figures. For example, Transformers or Superman. Therefore, Yi Yu had bought him a recently trendy hand model. Chapter 1866. Hearing that, Su Qianxi suddenly felt a little uncomfortable when she saw Li Mosen holding the model box with a look of surprise on his face. Looking at Mosen, Su Qianxi walked over and asked, "Which TV show is this person from?" "It's not a TV show. It's a character from a comic book. I love it," Li Mosen said as he sat on the sofa and opened the package. "You still read comics?" "Yes, my classmates have a lot of comics. We often read them together." "Does your school give you comics?" Su Qianxi asked casually. Li Mosen paused in the middle of opening the package. He lowered his head guiltily and said, "The school doesn't give them to me." "You secretly took it?" Su Qianxi pinched his little face, feeling a bit annoyed. Li Mosen shrunk his neck and said, "Well, we read them after class. We don't read them during class." Su Qianxi saw him like this and felt helpless. She chuckled and said, "I'm not scolding you. I used to do this when I was in school." Li Mosen didn't expect this. He looked up and blinked. "Mom, were you like this before?" "Everyone is like this. Everyone has their own ideas. It's impossible to be completely obedient. As long as it doesn't affect your studies, it's okay to have fun and relax." Su Qianxi's voice was soft. She tapped the tip of Li Mosen's nose. "But don't let the teacher find out." Li Mosen was completely relaxed when he heard this. He said, "The teacher knows." She said the same thing. "But she asked us to read them secretly and not affect other students." "Anything is fine." "Your teacher is so open-minded?" "Yes, my teacher likes me very much. She often gives me difficult questions to solve. My desk mate often goes to the teacher after class." Su Qianxi smiled and touched his little head. "But it's not good for you to always read your desk mate's comic books. If you want any comic books in the future, tell Mom and Dad will buy them for you. Also, if you want any model, just tell Mom and Dad will try their best to satisfy you." Li Mosen's eyes lit up. His fair face was full of a bright smile. His blue eyes were like two beautiful tanzanite. He looked at Su Qianxi and nodded. "Yes, thank you, Mom." As he spoke, he happily hugged Su Qianxi's neck and gave her a kiss. "Mommy, Mosen loves you." Su Qianxi finally smiled sincerely and kissed him on the cheek. She whispered, "Mom loves you too. You will always be Mom's little baby. Li Jianyue was only halfway through installing the Lego. When she saw them like this, she also stood up and ran over. She shouted, "Mom, Ursa loves you too. I want to smell good too." The little guy ran up to Su Qianxi and kissed her on the cheek. "Mommy, it's your turn to kiss me." Su Qianxi smiled and kissed Li Jianyue's face several times. Li Jianyue smiled happily and sat beside Li Mosen. "Brother Mosen, what is a cat warrior?" she asked. Li Mosen's smile faded a little. When he heard Li Jianyue's words, he corrected her. "It's not cat hero. It's magic hero." "What is magic, man?" "A great hero, a great, great hero. Let me tell you their story." Chapter 1867. After dinner, Yi Yu played with Li Jianyue for a while before heading home with Li Jinan. When she got home, Yi Yu realized how monotonous her house was. She let out a long sigh, rubbed her belly and said, "There are still a few months left. Baby, mommy is so bored." Li Jinan stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Why would I? I'll accompany you. If you're busy all day." "All right, I'm going for a prenatal checkup tomorrow." "Well, I'll tell my assistant that I won't be going to the office tomorrow. Let's accompany the baby for the checkup." Li Jinan's voice was low and sexy. She smiled and tugged at his sleeve. "I'm going to take a shower. Want to join me?" Li Jinan was speechless. Yi Qianshan had hot pot with Shinjilia and then went to an arcade to relax for a while before heading to the hotel near the office to check in. After taking a shower and changing into a fresh set of clothes, Yi Qianshan lay in bed and waited for Shinjilia to return from his shower. She couldn't help but take out her phone and open the remote surveillance video. Yi Qianshan rewound the video and watched it from the moment they left the house. She fast-forwarded all the way, but there was no sign of anyone. Yi Qianshan was merely watching out of boredom. It was one thing to be worried, but on second thought, she didn't seem to be a threat. Apart from a ridiculously tall nose and a face full of acne, there seemed to be nothing noteworthy about that person's face. However, just these two characteristics were already extremely rare. Yi Qianshan flipped through the pages and yawned in boredom. He was sleepy. Yi Qianshan had slept too late the night before and had woken up too early that morning. She had also suffered a shock. Her energy seemed to have been depleted. The image on the phone dimmed bit by bit. The fast-forward was not particularly exaggerated, and it was enough to clearly see every scene and every moment. The powerful night vision function displayed the entire pitch-black house on the screen. Even though there was no light in the house, he could still see everything inside clearly. However, all of a sudden, a shadow appeared in the dark room. Yi Qianshan's drowsiness was immediately chased away, and she stood up straight. His heartbeat suddenly seemed to jump up to his throat, terrifying and turbulent. Yi Qianshan paused the video and saw a shadow in the distance. It was a person. He looked a little tall and strong, wearing a cap and a black t-shirt. He was sneakily walking inside. Yi Qianshan's hand trembled and she dropped her phone. She shouted, "Old Shen." Shinjilia had just finished showering and was drying his hair as he walked out. When he heard Yi Qianshan's voice, he was startled. He looked over and asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Qianshan's body was visibly stiff. She turned her head to look at him with obvious fear on her face. "There's someone at home?" Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat. He strode forward and looked at the screen on the phone. On the screen, a tall man was standing impressively. The video was paused and it made people's hair stand on end. Shinjilia looked at the time. It was almost midnight. At this time, for normal office workers, most of them were already asleep. To sneak up at this time, he must be hiding something. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.